Hello, welcome to Snow Valley, a town full of tough cowboys and cowgirls, ranchers, and romance. As our town grows to include artists, beekeepers, authors, and crazy chickens, I hope you'll join me for the journey. Let's get right into it with her cowboy's forbidden kiss.
Chapter 1. December 31st dawned sunny and cold in Snow Valley, Montana. Breathing in the crisp air was like sucking down a mouthful of potato chips, sharp and unforgiving. Yet Sam Miller braved the elements to do a favor for a friend. Chet Bauer was on his honeymoon with Mercedes. Married just before Christmas, the couple had escaped the clutches of Old Man Winter and headed for a tropical paradise where the sun sparkled like diamonds on the waves. Flipping up the collar on his heaviest coat, Sam closed the door on the toasty cabin and climbed into his four-wheel drive truck. A honeymoon sounded like a wonderful place to be right about now. Besides Mercedes and Chet's nuptials a week ago, Adam and Destiny were getting married on Valentine's Day, and Amy and Jake planned to take the plunge on March 3rd. And those were just the events he could remember. His mom's fridge was papered in invitations to bridal showers. That was one part of the wedding he'd be happy to leave to his future bride. All those silly games. Bah! All of Snow Valley seemed to have succumbed to wedding fever. Tucked behind a ridge, Sam thought his cabin had escaped the virus, only to find himself wishing he'd catch the marriage bug sooner rather than later. His longing for a honeymoon had nothing to do with the snow and everything to do with getting out of the single life. Man, how he hated the dating scene. Truth was, he'd never been very good at playing the game of love. Navigating a woman's subtleties was like being put in as a relief pitcher and not knowing the catcher's signals. Too often, he ended up throwing a fastball that was knocked out of the park. Game over. With a shake of his shoulders, Sam headed out. Driving in Montana in the winter was always an adventure, especially on the back roads outside of town. The plow didn't make it this far. Ranchers were responsible to maintain their stretch of the highway, and they used everything from John Deere tractors to four-wheel drive trucks fitted with snow blades to clear the way. Snow fences were a common sight, their metal tops sticking out of the white berms. As he crested a hill, the valley spread out before him. In no time, the small white walls and red shutters of the O'Shea house came into view. His eyes were pulled that direction for a reason that eluded him. Habit. Probably, when a fine-looking woman lived in a house, a guy tended to keep an eye on it. Kat was charming with her Bostonian accent and big doe eyes. Katrina. A smile played at Sam's lips. The good Lord didn't make women like Kat every day. She had a way of spicing things up, and he wasn't just talking about her lemon pepper chicken. At the barn dance, she'd worn a red gingham dress that fit in all the right places with a pair of cowgirl boots. Sam's wasn't the only mouth dry with nerves. The punch bowl had emptied within seconds of her arrival as men tried to keep their cool. Sam ripped his eyes off the white clapboard home and happily tucked his thoughts of Kat into a mental pocket. He'd agreed to keep an eye on Chet's cattle while the lucky jerk was soaking in the sun and his bride's attentions, not to ogle his sister-in-law. Pulling into Chet's, he braced himself against the cold, stuffed his cowboy hat low on his head, wrapped his scarf tight, and jumped out of the truck. That first step away from the heater was always the hardest. He shuddered and plowed on. The Bauer home faced east, with Chet's backyard butting up against the pasture, making it easy to monitor the water levels in the 100-gallon galvanized tubs. Sam checked the troughs, the cattle startling away at his approach. The trough heaters did their job well, and steam rose up from the water's surface. All four of the tubs needed to be topped off, so Sam unwound the thick orange hose and started the process. As the water flowed, he leaned his elbows on the fence rail and breathed through his scarf while admiring Chet's spread. He had a barn off to the right, a big thing with stalls for several horses, a tack room, and hay storage. The house was older, but he'd heard that Mercedes was in the process of fixing it up. She had serious skills when it came to construction. The lawn was covered in snow, the few trees were mature and well tended. Between the barn and the pasture fence was the huge chicken pen, complete with a caged range area. Chet had built it for Mercedes as a wedding gift. She'd moved her flock of 12 into the spacious fowl complex before the wedding. A few birds braved the cold, scratching around in the range pen. While he watched, two flew out the small door to join their friends, squawking like they'd been offended but none the worse for wear. Strange, Sam tipped his head, wondering what they were doing. His curiosity turned to concern when two more hens flew out. A woman's scream pierced the frigid morning air, and Sam broke into a run. That wasn't a sound he could ignore. He threw open the unlatched man door and was immediately accosted by a blizzard of feathers and chicken food. Kat was in the center of the coop, screaming. Her arms protected her head as she twisted this way and that. "Get off. she yelled. The chickens shrieked almost as loud as Cat, flapping their wings on the attack. Sam stared in shock as a Rhode Island red flew at Cat, her feet clawing through the air. Cat tossed the feed bucket and ducked just in time. A rainstorm of pellets clattered to the floor. Holding back his angry bird joke, Sam scooted through the door. Broken eggs coated the wood floor, making it a slippery mess. Hey! Hey! He cooed as he wrapped his arms around Cat to shield her from the hens. Tucking his cheek next to hers, he caught her fruity scent. Cat buried her face in his neck, clutching his jacket to hold him close. Her breaths were ragged, like she was trying not to cry. He used his teeth to pull off his right glove and tangled his fingers into her soft honey-colored tresses, cupping the back of her head. Sam had never felt hair so silky. He had the overwhelming urge to pull it free from the collar of her coat and let it slide through his fingers. He settled for making small, soothing circles on her neck with his fingertips. The chickens were bound to calm down once they realized Cat wasn't going to pluck them bare. He wasn't so sure his racing heart would calm as easily. Holding Cat was a novel experience akin to the first time he'd approached a beehive. Exciting, somewhat dangerous, with the promise of something sweet. Cat's breathing evened, but she shook like a sapling in a storm. Sam pulled her tighter, forgetting about chickens and bees and focusing on the woman tucked into his arms. She fit nicely against him, and she somehow smelled of peaches. He liked peaches. She moved her head to his shoulder. Man, did he love peaches. What happened? He asked. Around them, the chickens kept their feet on the ground, and a few settled into the roosts. Cat, however, was very unsettled in Sam's arms. And it felt wonderful. Chapter 2. Cat leaned into Sam, relaxing in his strong and protective embrace. She'd recognized his voice when he came through the door and had unashamedly thrown herself into his open arms, seeking shelter from one raging chicken. I was collecting the eggs and Bessie went nuts. I hate that chicken. If she wasn't Mercedes only red, I'd take great joy in making her into chicken noodle soup. Sam chuckled, the sound deep in his rather impressive chest. Sure, the guy had on a few layers, but a girl can tell when a guy is built well. Besides, this wasn't the first time Cat had noticed Sam's physique. She'd also noticed the way he kept his dark hair short and the way his cobalt blue eyes said much more than his words. So far, her covert glances had been from a safe distance. Sam was one of her first friends in Snow Valley, and all those months ago she'd made sure he knew she only wanted a friend. As up close and personal as they were right now, and with his clean-shaven jaw brushing her forehead, she was noticing a whole lot about Sam that she'd never seen before. Things that made her think staying just friends was a hasty decision. Like the way he made her feel safe, even in a coop full of crazy chickens. She shuddered again, thinking of their sharp beaks and long claws. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. Sam laughed. "Yeah, I'm a real dragon slayer." Cat pulled slightly away so she could look him in the eyes, not willing to be out of his arms while they were still in the coop. Chickens are direct descendants from dragons. Don't tell me you didn't know that. Sam shook his head. His face was serious, as if he believed her, and his eyes danced with laughter. "I had no idea." Cat crinkled her forehead. "I'm pretty sure it's true. They both lay eggs. And have wings. And I'll bet dragon skin feels like chicken skin." "I swear," Bessie breathed fire. Cat grinned. "Let's hope not." He widened his eyes and looked around in mock fear. "This is a wood coop." Cat slapped his shoulder. "Get me out of here before she goes off again." "Of course, my lady." Sam tipped his hat, and Cat's stomach did a little flip. Rationalizing her reaction to him as having been perfectly natural under the circumstances, she hurried through the door and into the winter sunshine. She flipped the latch to keep the devils inside where they belonged and then hunched forward. "I'm such a chowderhead. I forgot the eggs." Sam shook his head. "I doubt there were any that survived." "Stupid Bessie." Cat scowled. "I was going to make pumpkin bread." "Now I'm upset at Bessie." Sam matched her posture, which looked ridiculous on a full-grown man. "If I catch her, will you cook her up?" Fighting a smile at seeing such a tall, strong man looking silly on her behalf, Cat asked innocently, "Did you think you were getting some of my pumpkin bread?" He folded his arms. "I am taking care of a whole herd of cattle. And cows are way bigger than the chickens. I figured if you get pumpkin bread, I should too." Ken snorted. "You can have the cows. If I promise to make you pumpkin bread, will you feed the flock?" Sam shook his head. "Not for bread made without eggs." She sighed, thinking of her ruined contribution to the Bauer family New Year's party. Spending the night with several couples and their children who varied in age was much different from how she would spend the holiday if she were back in Massachusetts. In Boston, she'd be headed out with friends or quite possibly on a date with one of the single men from church. She'd been much more social in the city, always running here or there with a friend or her sister. Moving to Snow Valley to follow her dream of becoming an author had been a change in everything from location to culture. Here, she tended to hole up with her laptop, pushing herself to get the next book done. For the most part, she was content. But when the Christmas ball, barn dance, or bonfire rolled around, she thought having a life wouldn't be so bad. It's just as well. I don't know what I was thinking volunteering for this. You're a good sister. Sam cuffed her shoulder. Kat fought a sigh. She liked the feel of being held by Sam much more than palling around. For just a moment she wondered if she asked, if Sam would follow her back into the chicken coop and they could pick up where they'd left off. And why not? There was an undeniable current running between them back there, and a homicidal hen. She dashed the idea of stealing away with Sam for a while at the thought of facing Bessie again. Her at the foul doubled. I should get a stinking medal. She pulled a piece of eggshell off her jacket and made a face. My sneaks are covered in. Kat lifted her leg to inspect her shoe. Ew. Sam removed a feather from her hair. She laughed. I'm a mess. A beautiful mess, though. Sam tossed the feather to the side as easily as he'd tossed out the compliment. Yet his sincerity shone through. She stared at him, wondering what to say. Had he felt the flux of attraction too? Nervous, her brain froze like a tongue on a metal pipe in the middle of January. How on earth could she write words for over a dozen fictional characters, and yet she couldn't come up with one intelligent thing to say right now? I really need to get out more. I'd better check the water. He headed towards the back fence, his boots leaving a trail of something she'd rather not name in the snow. Thanks again. Kat called, pleased that she'd been able to get that much out. No problem. Sam grinned over his shoulder, cutting a fine figure in his cowboy hat, heavy work coat, and jeans that looked like they were made just for him. Kat hurried into the house, where the wood stove blazed. Stripping down to her long-sleeved t-shirt and jeans in the mudroom, she hurried to the kitchen window to watch Sam. His movements were sure, and he looked like the star of a Western romance, leaning against the fence with one foot resting on the bottom rail. A true city girl, she'd found that the cowboy look had grown on her since moving to Snow Valley. So much so that she'd strayed from her best-selling Regency romance books and started writing a ranch romance. The hero was giving her trouble though. She wanted a man hard and weathered by life, a gunslinger unafraid to fight but who hesitated because he knew he'd win. He had to be rugged and yet tender enough to capture the damsel's heart. Watching Sam brought inspiration pounding at the door, and she headed for her laptop. After a couple hours of hammering out the word count, Kat had more than saving her from chickens to thank Sam for today. Maybe she'd make him that pumpkin bread after all. All she needed was 3 eggs. Darn that Bessie. With a goofy smile on her face and several layers of clothing, she headed out to Dove's grocery. Chapter 3. As far as first dates go, this one wasn't too bad. New year, new record, right? Sam smiled. Roxy was strong, independent, smart, and pretty with her button nose and Julia Roberts lips. She was 1 semester away from a bachelor's degree. What are your plans after graduation? She lifted her shoulders. I want to find a way to work from home so I can be a mom someday. Turning, she drew a smiley face in the moisture on the window. This is where Sam usually got into trouble. He wasn't sure if she was throwing out a hint or just making conversation. He hoped it was the latter. Roxy was the perfect farmer's wife. He was jumping the gun, as this was their first night out, but Sam was done with casual dating. And what better place to start his own Snow Valley romance than at the New Year's bonfire? How are your parents doing? They're recovering from the holidays. Both my brothers brought their families this year and stayed for a week. The house is in complete disarray, but we loved every minute of it. Sounds like a great holiday. It was. Her voice held a note of longing. 4 years his junior, Sam had missed Roxy in high school. When they'd bumped into each other at Dove's grocery on Christmas Eve, it was pretty hard to overlook her flirtatious giggle filling the frozen foods aisle. Sam parked next to a minivan in the open field. His tires sank an inch into the snow, the sound cutting of their conversation. Let's set up our seats, and then I'll find some hot chocolate. Roxy bounced her knees and rubbed her mittens together. Get me close to a fire, it's freezing. Sam grinned as he slung 2 camp chairs over his shoulder and offered his arm. Roxy took it with a shy smile. He had her situated and comfortable in no time. "I'll be right back, you good?" he asked. She nodded, tucking her hands under her thighs. Sam paid $20 for the 2 hot chocolates in styrofoam cups. "Thanks, Mr. O'Hare." He handed over the folded bill. The man's wife had undergone a hip replacement surgery and all proceeds from tonight were going to pay medical bills. "Keep the change." "Thank you, Sam." Sam nodded once before heading back to his seat. There was quite the crowd this year, and he had to weave in and out of people. One end of the 20 acres of pasture was set apart as a snowy football field with pickup trucks lined up on the sidelines, their lights illuminating the players. Chase and Adam Moon were out there quarterbacking opposing teams. The brothers had a history of competing, but they were keeping it friendly tonight. Porter Wilson and Jace McAllister were the running backs. No one moved all that fast, since they were wearing snow pants and heavy coats. The game was more for fun, a way to work off some energy after being cooped up inside. Spring football was where the gloves came off. The middle of the pasture was dedicated to the hot chocolate booth as well as an area for Dutch oven cooking. Cobblers were always a favorite. "Hey, Sam," called Susan Bauer. "Hi." Sam lifted a cup in greeting to Chet's older sister. "Apple cobbler cake made with apples from your trees." She pointed at the cast iron pan settled atop glowing pieces of charcoal. "Then you know it's going to be good." Sam grinned. "Stop by for a piece later on." "Will do." The final section of the field had 3 giant bonfires lighting up the night. Camp chairs circled each, scattered like blankets at a spring picnic. The heat from the fires could be felt from 10 feet away, and no one settled a chair too close. Spying Roxy, Sam carefully stepped around the group. He was making his way to the inner circle when someone bumped him from behind and he had to step quickly to the side to avoid spilling the hot drinks on his gloves. The girl who had bumped him landed in the empty seat next to Roxy. They both squealed and threw their arms around each other's necks. "Amy! I didn't know you were in town," exclaimed Roxy. Not wanting to interrupt their reunion, Sam hung back, positioning himself behind Roxy. Caught up in their reunion, neither girl noticed him. Shrugging, he took a sip of his cocoa. "Just right. Kind of like tonight." Sam grinned. The bonfire tradition started during the Great Depression. Residents were living out of their gardens and killing cattle to fill the soup pot and save on feed. The simple act of gathering to ring in the new year with neighbors who were hurt in as much as you were fortified the residents of this close community. They toasted leaving the old year, praying for brighter times in the new. Sam held the same prayer in his heart. Some refused to see his growth and treated him like the clueless boy he'd once been. Like Luke, who had punched him last spring when he'd flirted with the new massage therapist in town. Sam shrugged it off. Over time, his quiet confidence had won him a few good friends. He had his eye on a piece of property adjacent to his. While he had enough to support himself, he'd need more land to support a family. If he stayed the course, it might even win him the affections of the sweet woman who waited for her hot chocolate. Amy wiggled in the seat. "I just got in today, and I'm leaving Saturday to fly back to Nevada. I just came to introduce my fiancé to my parents." Whipping off her glove, Amy brandished an impressive diamond. "Danny is a chiropractor and is opening his practice just outside of Las Vegas." Another wedding. The epidemic spread. Someone was making good money on engagement rings lately. "How exciting. Is he here?" Roxy craned her neck, looking beyond Amy. "Yeah, he's playing in the football game." She rolled her eyes. "I had to come find you. Who are you here with?" Roxy ducked her head. "Sam Miller." Amy's bubbly exterior popped. "Why?" she asked, her tone suggesting there was something wrong. Sam lowered his brow. A phrase his mom had repeated played through his head. "Those who eavesdrop are bound to hear things they don't want to." "No one else asked, and I wasn't about to miss out on the bonfire," replied Roxy. "Besides, he's a gentleman, and I know he won't expect anything out of me at the end of the night." "You should have just come alone." "I mean, Sam." Amy reprimanded Roxy. Sam's shoulders dropped, the drink suddenly heavy in his hands. Once again, he'd played the game without knowing the rules, and he'd lost. This time stung more than others had. Probably because he'd thought Roxy saw the man he'd become. "It's not like I'm marrying him," defended Roxy. "Ouch. Can you imagine?" Amy broke into giggles. Roxy wasn't laughing. She shifted in her seat. "Speaking of marriage, when's yours?" "This summer. I'll send you an invitation." "Send it to my parents' house." I'll be done with school by then. Sounds good. I'd better get. She hugged Roxy once more. When she stood, she almost bumped into Sam, again. Oh. Hey, Sam. Amy, Sam replied without a smile. If he hadn't overheard their conversation, he wouldn't have remembered her name. He probably should pretend like he hadn't heard her, but he had. Amy scurried off, her face red, though Sam wasn't sure if it was from the heat of the fire or from a worry that she'd been overheard. Roxy had the same flushed look on her face. Perhaps, she too was worried he knew what she'd said. Here's your cocoa. He thrust the cup in her general direction and sat down in the recently vacated camp chair. Thanks. Roxy's smile appeared genuine. But how was a guy to tell? I hope you like it. It cost me more than you'll know. He wasn't thinking about the $20, he was thinking about his hope that tonight would be the start of something great. He stared at the crackling fire as he took a long drink from his cup, unsure what to say now. They'd had a good conversation going before he'd left for drinks. His desire to continue had been doused by the knowledge that Roxy was using him like a fill-in-the-blank date. They watched the flames in silence for a few minutes. Do you mind if we call it a night? He finally asked. But it's only 10:30. Roxy looked confused. Sam was at a loss. Was he supposed to play along with her charade? Is that what people did on dates? If girls didn't want to go out with him, they should say so up front. It would sure save him a lot of time cleaning out his truck and a good chunk of money on dinners in general. Sam, called Kyle Linwood from a few feet away. Kyle was the high school gym teacher and coached the baseball team. Sam had gone along as a team chaperone and assistant coach when needed. Relieved to have the pressure off, Sam waved as Kyle and Cameron made their way through the crowd, holding hands. Roxy said hello to Cameron. Can I ask you a couple questions about the Miss Snow Valley pageant? I'm not really involved, replied Cameron, flipping her long brown hair over her shoulder. But you've coached before, right? Yeah. What do you want to know? I'll be happy to help if I can. Roxy began firing questions at Cameron about evening gowns and judges. The guys tuned out with the words talent competition. How's it going? Kyle tipped his American Ninja Warrior baseball cap toward Roxy, indicating he wanted to know about the date and not Sam's orchard. Sam shrugged. Stuck in the friend zone? Kyle spoke low, the crackle of the wood and fire covering their conversation. Yep. Stuck there forever and always and as long as I shall live. First Kat and now Roxy. He kind of wished he'd asked Kat to come tonight. They would have had a lot more fun together than he was having feeling all alone. Besides, there'd been something between them in that chicken coop, something he couldn't quite name. I feel for ya, man. Kyle clapped Sam on the shoulder, bringing him out of his ponderings. Yeah. Sam tuned back into the girls' conversation. Call me the day you get back in town, and we'll get everything submitted, said Cameron. Great. Roxy looked pleased. Kyle gave a small wave and took Cameron's hand to lead her through the crowd. Sam's gaze followed after them, the hot chocolate turning sour in his stomach. Having a hand to hold wasn't too much to ask for out of life. Sam gave himself a good shake. Self-pity was not an attractive quality and not something Sam was prone to fall into. Roxy smiled tentatively at him as he sat down. Are you feeling okay? She asked. Sam fought the urge to sigh, loudly. Roxy was a cute girl, down-home pretty. The kind of woman who didn't need makeup to make her beautiful. And he could see how, to the man who loved her, she'd be the most beautiful woman on earth. He could have been that man for her. Swallowing his disappointment, he decided that if making a new friend was the worst thing that happened tonight, then the night wasn't a total waste. I'm good. Do you want to see if Susan Bauer's apple cobbler cake is finished? Roxy's smile was half happy and half relieved. What's a cobbler cake? Sam tipped his head to the side. A cake that's gooey, warm, and sweet on the bottom, like a dump cake. But this one has oats and stuff like a cobbler. Sounds delicious. They made their way over to the huge Dutch ovens, where Susan put Roxy to work drizzling glaze over a cherry cobbler while she sprinkled cinnamon and sugar over the finished apple cobbler cake. Sam spent the rest of the evening being a good friend to Roxy, and when the clock struck midnight, he blew his noisemaker and pretended that he wasn't at all disappointed that he didn't get a kiss. After dropping Roxy off, Sam meandered home. Watering and feeding Chet's cattle would come soon enough, yet he had no desire to flop into bed and stare at the ceiling. His log home was situated behind a bluff, just past his parents' place, unseen from the road. He suspected a lot of people thought that at age 29 he still lived with his parents. He'd never put much stock into gossip, Except having heard his name batted around like an old sock in a box full of coyotes tonight had him thinking maybe he should pay closer attention. A light was on in his mama's kitchen, and Sam tapped the brakes to slow down. His parents never stayed up to see the ball drop, even when he was a kid. Parking behind their house, he went in through the side door and peeked into the kitchen, where he found his mom at the table. She wore the fuzzy bathrobe he'd bought her last Christmas over a pair of faded flannel pajamas. Her blonde gray hair was braided down her back, tied with a scrap of fabric. "Mom." Sam removed his shoes. Setting down her mug of herbal tea, Edna motioned to the seat across from her. "Hi, Sam. How was your date?" "Fine." He shucked his coat and hung it on the back of the chair. "Just fine." "Just fine, Mom." He got himself a drink of water from the sink and sat down. "How come you're up?" "Toothache." "Didn't Dr. Mason tell you to lay off the soda?" "Yeah, but I heard there's a new dentist moving in, so I thought I'd get myself a second opinion. Besides," she smiled, "it's just so darn good." Sam took a drink of water. There was no changing his mother's mind until she was darn good and ready to change it herself. Besides, she'd had a diet soda open on the counter every day of his life. "Tell me about your evening," Mom prodded. Sam hunched over the table, his arms circling the glass. He didn't want to tell his mom about the conversation he'd overheard. Besides reminding him that an eavesdropper never hears good things, she'd probably snub Roxy's mom at church or the Doves, and there'd be hard feelings. Roxy is a good friend. But not a girlfriend. Nope. Why not? He tried to play it casual and leaned back to sling an arm over the back of the chair. "I don't think she's all that interested." "Then she's blind." Edna's voice was deadpan serious. Sam chuckled at her bluntness. His mom stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Have you thought about playing hard to get?" He must be ultra pathetic in the dating department if his mom felt the need to offer advice. Sam suppressed a groan. "I'm the man. I should do the asking." "I completely agree. But maybe you're asking too soon." "What do you mean?" "I know you, Sam. You see something you want, and you go after it full bore. Maybe, when it comes to women, you should hold off a bit, wait for them to come to you." Sam rubbed his hand through his short cropped hair. "I don't know if I'd feel right waiting for a girl to ask me out. And I'd never get another date." "That's not what I'm saying." Mom covered his hand with hers. "All I'm saying is that you should hold off a bit, see her around town a few times, maybe at church, and if she keeps talking to you, then you can ask her out. You're like an excited puppy, son. Women think puppies are cute, but they don't take them seriously." Sam took a sip of water. "I'll think about it." "See that you do." She stood. "My painkillers are kicking in. I'm going to give this sleep thing another try." She kissed the top of his head. "Love you." "You too." Sam retrieved his coat and boots and drove the rest of the way down the lane. His house wasn't large, but it was the exact right size for a young couple. He snorted. At the rate he was going, there wouldn't be any young left in that couple. After adding a couple logs to the wood-burning stove, he climbed into bed. He'd spent a lot of years doing the best he knew how in the dating department. Maybe his mom was right. Maybe he should try playing hard to get. The clock in the front room chimed one bell, the hum lingering. January 1st. New year, time to come up with a new plan. He took a deep breath, threading his fingers together and resting his hands on his chest, pondering. He'd asked Roxy out at their first meeting. He'd only seen her one other time after that, at church on Sunday. Had he waited, say one more meeting to put himself on the line, they wouldn't have gone out at all, and she wouldn't have played him like a rookie at bat. So, 3 is the magic number? 3 spontaneous meetings before he could arrange a date. Nodding once to cement his will, he rolled over to settle in. Maybe by next New Year's, he'd have someone to kiss at midnight? A guy could always hope, right? Chapter 4. Kat stared at the empty sheet of paper before her, knowing that every author's worst nightmare was a blank paper and no inspiration. New Year's morning was half over, and she had yet to come up with one resolution. Fiction was so much easier to write than a new path for her life. Resolutions were a big thing in her family. Her mom made spreadsheets. Her dad created reward charts. One year he stopped cussing and earned a trip to the Library of Congress. A vacation in the biggest and oldest library in the U.S. May not seem like much of a reward for most people, but for an English professor, it was heaven. Sure, She could put something down about releasing a book every other month or attending some writers' conference, but none of those options felt personal. Looking around Grandpa's kitchen didn't help much. The thick carving block she and Mercedes had installed for a counter was clean and orderly. The glass tile backdrop was stunning. The shiny stainless steel appliances hummed, and the beadboard walls were clean. There wasn't a thing left to do in this house, or to put on her goal sheet. "Morning, pumpkin." Grandpa came in, already wearing his Sunday trousers and a blue button-up shirt. The bald spot on the top of his head reflected the overhead lights. He'd throw on his tie and dress shoes right before they left. "Morning. How'd it go today?" he asked. Kat looked down at the fluffy kitty pajama bottoms she'd stuffed into snow pants to do Mercedes's chores this morning. Someone, who shall receive a loaf of her best pumpkin bread, had already fed the chickens. The cattle's water was topped off, too, so she had a pretty good idea of who had proven himself a knight in heavy winter clothing. "Better. I collected a full basket of eggs." She grinned down at the table. "Looks like Sam was getting some pumpkin bread after all." "You're becoming a pro." Kat snorted. "No thanks to Bessie. She planted herself in the roost. That chicken is the spawn of." "Hello." Grandpa picked up the phone on the first ring. He gave Kat an amused shrug and a wink. "Good morning to you, too. What's on your mind, Sam?" Grandpa settled into the chair across from Kat. She tapped her pen on the paper and kept her eyes down, but she kept her ears on this side of the conversation. To say she'd thought about Sam now and again since he'd taken on the dragon chicken was something of an understatement. If her thoughts were a loaf of bread, Sam would have been the warm, soft center with everything else in her life taking up the crust. "I can see how that would be a problem. Why don't I come have a look first thing tomorrow? I can take some measurements and put a bid together for the work." "Alrighty." Grandpa hung up the phone. "What do you have there?" Kat sighed. "My New Year's resolutions." She turned the blank sheet his way. Grandpa dropped his chin as if he were trying to look over his bifocals, except he'd had laser surgery before moving to Snow Valley. He'd never quite lost the mannerism, though. Taking the pen from her hand, he slid the paper to his side of the table, wrote something, and handed it back. "There." Kat read, "Create romance." She laughed. "Grandpa, I create romance every day. I'm a romance writer." "Not on the page, pumpkin." He tapped the wood with 2 fingers. "You need romance in your life." She leaned onto the table. "Are you trying to get rid of me?" "Get rid of you?" His heavy eyebrows rose like windshield wipers, up and away. "Marry me off to some rancher so you can have this place to yourself? I see how you are." "Chowderhead," Grandpa teased. "Alls I know is, you moved Mercedes next door to Chet's, and now you're working on me." Kat checked her smile. She and Mercedes had moved to Snow Valley to fix up Grandpa's childhood home for him to retire to, but Grandpa couldn't have known his next-door neighbor was a book-loving single cowboy who would sweep Mercedes off her feet. "I just want to see you happy." "I'm perfectly content." Kat held up her hands. "Well, that stinks." "Says who?" "Says me. You should be going out, dating, kissing boys, and staying out past curfew. You are a bad influence." Kat patted his hand. "Which is why I love you so much." Grandpa smiled. Kat's gaze fell to the sheet in front of her. Romance isn't as easy in life as it is on the computer screen. Romance doesn't have to be big. It's in the little things. Like, saving a seat for someone or, feeding the chickens. She bit her lip. Why she suddenly thought of Sam, of the way his strong arms tucked her close, or how he smelled of laundry soap and tree sap, she didn't know. "What?" Grandpa tipped his head. "Nothing." Kat gathered her sparse list and kissed Grandpa on his bald spot. "I'm going to get ready for church." She hurried up the steps, her hand brushing the dark mahogany banister she and Mercedes had installed, sanded, and stained almost a year ago. Showering quickly, she was wrangling a pair of nylons when her cell phone rang. The caller ID showed her dad's number. "Hi." "Hello." "How are ya, Dad?" "You, not ya, Katrina," he corrected her diction. "I am doing well." Kat smiled. She loved needling her dad, the English professor, with her choice of words. Good. Her parents thought she was slaving away over the next great American novel, something full of prose and promise. If her dad knew she wrote historical romances, and now westerns, he'd have a conniption. "What are your plans for the day?" he asked. "I'm going to church with Grandpa, and then I was going to do some online shopping." The nylons in place, she turned the phone on speaker so she could finish getting ready while they talked. Despite his pretentious literary preferences, her dad was one of her favorite people. You girls and your Sunday shopping. Your mom is going to the grotto. Kat groaned in envy. The grotto was an upscale shopping center with stores that catered to the clothes hound barking inside every O'Shea woman. I love the grotto. Will you tell her to keep an eye out for a red leather jacket? I'd take black, but I've been dying for a red one. I'm sure you'll live without a red jacket, but I'll pass along your message. Thanks. What are you doing today? Kat avoided asking about his resolutions. He'd have something wonderful, like eliminate unnecessary adverbs from his vocabulary and incorporate the whole G section of Webster's into his everyday conversation. All she had was create romance, and Grandpa had written that one down. She wasn't sure if she was officially picking it up. Dad cleared his throat, a sure sign that whatever he was about to say would be a change in one, if not both, of their lives. Do you remember Robert Floyd? Kat bit her lip. She did remember Robert, and she also remembered that he liked to be called Bob. Dad knew it too, but he'd never felt comfortable around Bob, who liked to grab his shoulder as they talked. He's the adjunct faculty member who takes the night classes in your department, isn't he? Right. He's accepted a full-time position, and we're looking for a replacement. Kat coughed to cover her laugh. Great. You two will be the best of friends in no time. Sarcasm? Asked Dad. Of course. You get that from your mother. And I love her for it. Kat searched for the silver loop earrings that went with her dress. In all seriousness, tell him congratulations. I'd rather be telling you congratulations. Excuse me. Kat slid one earring in place. I talked to the department head about the possibility of you becoming our adjunct instructor. He was impressed with your resume. You'll need to take a few teacher development classes, but there's no reason you couldn't start this semester. Kat froze. Are you serious? Yes.
I don't even know what to say. She looked about the room. The room she'd painstakingly sanded, scraped, painted, and refurbished. I hadn't even thought about moving home. Grandpa just got here in Mercedes.
Mercedes is married now, her focus is going to change. Kat sat on her bed. Her dad had expectations for his children and often expressed them with a firmness that hindered argument. She'll always be my sister. That's true, but she has a home now, a husband, a ranch to run. You two have been peas in a pod for so long. He left the rest of the sentence for Kat to fill in. For so long that being apart will be hard, but it's inevitable, it's time to let go. Kat knew things would change once Mercedes got married. She'd planned on it. Chet's family had welcomed Mercedes and Kat like they were their own, despite their Boston accents and city ways. She enjoyed learning how to bake from Chet's older sister, Whitney, and teaching his young cousin, Aiden, home maintenance. But maybe what her dad said was true. Maybe she needed to step back and let Mercedes settle into her new family. After all, it was Mercedes who wanted the country life. Kat had come along, happy for the adventure, but she'd always planned on returning to Boston at some point. An adjunct position at the university was huge. It could be a stepping stone to following in her dad's footsteps. How soon would I need to be there? We start in 3 weeks. You'll need to go through orientation, so you'll have to be here the week before classes start, at the latest. 2 weeks. Let me think on it. She slipped her feet into the knee-high denim boots with a 2-inch heel. Not practical for playing in the snow, but they looked great with her creamy lace skirt and black button-up shirt. A wide brown belt studded with faux ivory completed her ensemble. Sounds fair. Have a wonderful day. I will, you too. Give my love to Mom. As always. They hung up, and Kat checked herself in the mirror before making her way downstairs. All set? Asked Grandpa as he held out his arm. Kat took it, not sure if he offered because she needed help traversing the snow in her boots or he needed the help in his slippery dress shoes. Of course. If she moved home, who would be here to help Grandpa to the car? Grandpa opened the door for Kat before making his way around to the driver's side. He'd taken to Snow Valley like a bird coming home to nest. Said he loved the quiet. Kat loved that too. She could think here and often found that all she needed for inspiration was a half hour on the back deck watching the sun set. Or 5 minutes with Sam in the chicken coop. Her body flushed with the memory of his chin brushing her cheek. Putting her thoughts aside, she asked, "Are you okay if I invite Sam over for Sunday dinner?" She wanted to do something to thank him for feeding the chickens, and pumpkin bread was a small offering compared to taking on the feathered red dragon. Oh. Grandpa grinned. Giving the resolution a good start this morning? Do you want me to make myself scarce? What? Cat blushed. No, nothing like that. I owe him one. That's all. Fine by me. Grandpa turned the radio on, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. Cat watched the Montana scenery pass by, contemplating her dad's offer. Moving home. It was difficult to think of Boston as home anymore. Snow Valley had gotten under her skin and worked its way into her heart. The town was one big family, parts of it were dysfunctional, as with any family, but a family nonetheless. Leaving that behind wasn't a decision to make lightly. Then again, if she was going to work on her resolution, she needed to go where the single scene was hot and hopping. It wouldn't take long to fall back in with old friends. Friends she'd hardly spoken to since moving. Somehow, she couldn't imagine Snow Valley letting her go as easily as Boston had. Whitney would find a way to send her goodies in the mail. Aiden would FaceTime. Harley and Shelby, Chet's nieces, would email. Mercedes would call every day. Kat glanced at Grandpa. She'd miss him too. He'd been a mainstay in her life, the one who welcomed her home from elementary school and grumbled over algebra homework. And then there was Sam. Would he keep in touch or let her fade away like snow on the mountaintops? The idea didn't sit well. Crossing her ankles, she decided to keep the conversation with her dad on the DL for now. Chapter 5. Sam hated being late for church, everyone turning to look when the back door opened. But it couldn't be helped. Not after Bessie had attacked the feed bucket, possessed with the evil spirit of chickens gone bad. His Carhartt overalls were covered in chicken goo, and he'd had to start a load of laundry before he could leave his cabin to stave off the smell. Then there was the call to Edward O'Shea, Kat's grandpa, about fixing up the bunkhouses. His pruning team would arrive at the end of the month. He'd inspected the dwellings on the edge of the orchard. Several needed repairs before the men arrived. Migrant workers followed the seasons. Most came at harvest time, bringing their whole families, and everyone pitched in to get the fruit off the trees. But in the winter, the men came for pruning, bringing only a couple women to cook for them. Where the rest of the family stayed, Sam had no idea. The men rarely spoke of where they came from or where they went. Jorge, the oldest of the group, organized their travels and handled the paperwork. His cell phone was the only way to get a hold of him, and he'd waited to hear back about their arrival before leaving the cabin. Driving fast was not an option on snow-packed roads, so he settled behind the wheel and ended up only 5 minutes late. For the Snow Valley congregation, that was considered on time. The church was packed. The first Sunday of every year had the best attendance, as everyone turned over a new leaf, or page in the hymnal, as it were. Smiling, Sam stopped at the back of the chapel to look for an open seat. He spied one next to Kat and her grandpa. Gabe Wesson sat in front of them with his 2 kids. If Sam knew Kat at all, she'd have Gabe's daughter Lindsay in her lap before the chorus of the first hymn was over. Kat had a beautiful singing voice, the kind that he would love to hear in his kitchen, his front room, his trees. He quickly shook off the thought. If anyone had placed him at arm's length, it was Kat. She'd told him right up front that she wasn't looking for a man, but she was always looking for a friend. He respected her for being straightforward and enjoyed the way she'd taken the pressure off. There was a seat by Roxy, who happened to glance back and see him. She gave a small wave and nodded her head to the open spot. He was about to make his way to sit next to her when his resolution came to mind. Instead of following his common sense, which apparently wasn't all that sensible in the dating world, he waved her off and took the third empty seat in the back row. Pastor John had picked starting anew for the sermon this fine New Year's Day, a timely subject. The gentle pastor reinforced Sam's desire to make changes in himself in order to change things in his world. The rule of 3 played over in his mind, and he once again nodded to stamp it into his heart. With the final amen, Sam had set his sights on staying his course long enough for it to become a part of his heart. After the service, he spoke to Eli for a minute about welding the Pluco track. The apple picking machine had limped through the summer. Several areas needed reinforcement, and Eli was the only welder in the valley. Eli agreed to come over the next day and take a look at it. After agreeing on a time to meet, Eli wrapped his arm around his wife, and they headed out the door together. Sam watched them go, wondering if he'd ever have what Eli had. He was deep in thought when Roxy touched his arm. "Hi." She tucked her short blonde hair behind her ear. "I had a lot of fun last night." Sam considered her for a moment. Normally, He would take her comment as an invitation to ask her out again. But he was learning that wasn't the way things always worked. Remembering Pastor John's admonition to stick to it for 30 days, he smiled. Me too. They stood there in an awkward silence for a moment before Roxy brightened. I'm not due back at school for another week or so. That's good. So, that gives me some free time this week. She lowered her gaze to the floor and then peeked up at him through lowered lashes. See, this was the part that threw Sam for a loop. Roxy had done the same thing when she was fishing for an invite to the bonfire. He'd bit, hook, line and sinker, only to find out she'd played him for a fool. Fool me once. I'm sure you'll need it to recharge your batteries before hitting it hard your last semester. He patted her on the arm. It's so good to see you. She looked up, surprise written all over her pretty little face. Oh. Okay. I'll see you around. Looking forward to it. Sam moved toward the back doors but was stopped by Paisley, the manager for the local band gone platinum, the Iron Sticks. She dragged a cute brunette behind her, one of those girls who has a style. Like she looked at the fashion world and said, "Nah, I'm good just the way I am." And she was good looking. Her boots came up her calf, and her flowing dress and long cardigan landed just above the knee. A black leather cuff graced her delicate wrist, and her heavy earrings jangled. Sam did a double take. Sam. Paisley said. I was hoping to see you here today. I wanted to introduce you to one of my dearest friends, Nellie. It's a pleasure to meet you. Sam put out his hand. Nellie flushed pink as she shook his hand. Likewise. Paisley continued with the introduction. She's my maid of honor, and she'll be working at the barn. The barn was quickly becoming a hot spot for country music artists to record. Snow Valley was far enough off the GPS that the press didn't pay it any attention, and Clay had installed the latest in sound equipment. That's great. Congratulations on the engagement, Paisley, Clay, too. I'm sure people around here thought Clay and I eloped a long time ago, but with the Iron Sticks on tour and setting up the new studio, we just haven't had time. Another couple succumbs to wedding fever. Sam brushed his hand over his mouth to hide his smile. Anyway, I'm kind of swamped with the new album right now, and poor Nellie doesn't know a soul in Snow Valley. A silence, not unlike the one he'd faced with Roxy, smothered them. Sam's natural desire to ask Nellie out rose to the tip of his tongue. Not that there was much to show her this time of year, but he'd gotten pretty creative when it came to planning dates. A winter picnic or horse-drawn sleigh ride, not to mention the upcoming sledding party, would be fun with a beautiful girl like Nellie. But that was all it would be, one date. Remembering the rule of 3, he tamped down on his instincts. He wasn't dating for fun anymore, he was dating for keeps, and he wouldn't play the fool any longer. Kat and her grandpa moved past them in the aisle. Sam's attention was drawn to the lacy skirt that swished as Kat walked. She looked good all the time, like she rolled out of bed and into a magazine. Sam nodded a greeting. Kat bit her lip and gave him a half-hearted smile. Her eyes were full of disappointment. He wanted to ask her about it, but was still held by the uncomfortable situation with Paisley and the new girl. Seeing Kat gave him a brilliant idea. Hey, Paisley, have you checked out Kat's books? Kat's books? Paisley furrowed her brow. She writes Christian romances. I've never read one, but my mom loves them. Do you read much? Sam rubbed his hands together. He could offer Nellie a great way to kill some time and promote Kat's novels all in one. Yeah, I love to read. Nellie shrugged a shoulder. Katrina O'Shea is her name, Sam supplied. That was Katrina O'Shea. Nellie craned her neck to look around Pastor John standing at the door and shaking hands as parishioners left. Yep. Sam rocked back on his heels, as proud as Puddin' of Kat's success. She'd really made something of herself and her dream. You should check them out. She's really talented. Excusing himself, he said, It was great to meet you. Welcome to Snow Valley. Thanks, Nellie replied. She smacked Paisley's arm. You didn't tell me. Whatever she was upset about faded away as Sam hurried out to the parking lot, wondering if he'd entered the twilight dating zone. The moment he resolved not to ask a girl out, he had two planted in his path. He considered the possibility that the Lord was testing his commitment to this plan, seeing if he was willing to let go of what he wanted now for what he wanted in the future. For Sam, a home and family were the ultimate blessing, and he was more than willing to forego a few bad first dates to create something that would last. Maybe after he ran into Nellie a few more times, he'd ask her out, but right now, he wanted to know what put the disappointment in Kat's eyes. He spent all morning picturing her surprise when she saw the chickens were already fed. His daydream had kept him warm while doing chores in the gray light of dawn. Hurrying to the parking lot, he slipped and caught himself before landing on his back. Edward's tail lights blinked once, and the truck pulled out of the parking lot. Sam smacked his fist against his leg, angry that the opportunity had slipped by. Chapter 6. Kat lifted the lid off the rice maker and let the steam escape. She'd tucked her phone between her shoulder and cheek so she could talk while she cut up a pineapple. Pastor John's sermon about starting anew had really hit home. For a moment, Kat entertained the idea that she and Sam could start anew and throw out the friends-only rule. But, after seeing him swarmed by females after church, she managed to talk herself out of that idea. Hello. Hi, Dad. Kat smiled at the idea that she would see him soon. To what do I owe the pleasure? Kat hacked the top off the pineapple and flipped it upside down on the breadboard to let the juices spread from the bottom of the fruit all the way through before cutting it up to serve. I'd like to accept the job. Wonderful. Kat chewed her lip. I'll look at flights tomorrow. Her car was buried under 3 feet of snow and wasn't going anywhere until spring. But she could take the subway to campus or borrow her mom's car. Things would work out. Of course. Of course. We'll pick you up. Just text me the flight information. I will. Katrina, I'm so proud of you. Kat smiled. For the past year, she'd made a decent paycheck as an author. She'd lived her dream, waking up each morning feeling blessed to be able to share stories with her readers. Somehow, she'd known it couldn't last forever. Eventually the alarm buzzes, and dreams come to an end. A heaviness settled into her chest. I'm not losing a dream, I'm simply replacing it with another. The time had come to put away childish things and move into the world of adults who contribute to society, raise families, and move out of their grandpa's house. They said goodbye and hung up. Kat stared at the pineapple. You have it easy. You were born a pineapple. People are born blank. We have to make it up as we go. The oven timer went off, and Grandpa wandered into the kitchen. Kat smiled. Your timing is impeccable. You can call me many names, but don't ever call me late for dinner, he replied with a grin. Kat set a plate of teriyaki chicken and rice in front of Grandpa, the bowl of pineapple chunks in the middle of the table, and 2 small bowls of spinach salad by their cups. She took a seat across from Grandpa and bowed her head while he blessed the food. After saying amen, Grandpa stared at the empty placemat on his right. What happened? I thought you were going to ask Sam for dinner. I'm sure he has plenty of options. Kat speared a piece of chicken and chomped down on it, chewing thoroughly. The image of Sam at church, looking mighty fine in his gray suit, surrounded by every available woman in Snow Valley popped in her head, making her want to go all chicken Bessie right there. Well, maybe not every woman. Grandpa chuckled. Scared off by a gaggle of females, eh? The only female that scares me off is Bessie, Satan's favorite chicken. Kat used her knife enthusiastically. I don't believe in falling in line for a guy. I'm not a groupie. Grandpa ate for a moment in silence. I wouldn't ever want you to settle for someone who doesn't think the world of you. Kat sighed, the fight leaking out of her. I know. Sam's a good friend. Sure, sure. Grandpa tucked into his rice. Kat narrowed her eyes. You're not hiding anything, old man. You might as well tell me what you're thinking. Grandpa's gaze drifted to the triple-layer cake on the breadboard. Kat grinned. She knew the way to get information out of Grandpa. Do I have to bribe you? I'm just weighing my desire to speak against my desire for dessert. Is it bad enough I'll have to send you to bed without dessert? Kat joked. She'd never treat her Grandpa like that, but she desperately needed to lighten the mood. Grandpa smiled kindly and placed his weathered hand over hers. Men should be standing in line for you. But, you're not the best at sending signals. What? It took until you were 3 before I thought you liked me. Kat scowled. That's because you had that awful toupee. I thought for sure the thing would bite me. It was Grandpa's turn to laugh. You little scamp. Kat grinned. I haven't flirted in ages. I think I forgot how. Grandpa considered the cake. That's why I think Sam would be a good match for you. He doesn't play games. Kat turned to pick up the breadboard and set the cake between them. Her pumpkin bread was good, but her chocolate devil's cake was the stuff dreams were made of. It was the kind of dessert she'd serve a date. A cute date. The kind of date you wanted to kiss goodnight. And hello. And hey, it's Tuesday. She wiped her fork off on her napkin and took a big chunk without bothering to cut a slice. Grandpa followed suit. They carved their way into chocolate heaven while Kat mulled over the situation with Sam and the phone call she'd had with Dad. Out of all the men she'd met in Snow Valley, and there had been a surprising number of great guys, Sam was the one she could picture herself with. They got along great as friends, and after the Bessie incident, she was pretty sure they'd get along in a lot of other ways, too. Shoving her feelings aside, she reasoned that Sam had plenty of options, and she needed to increase hers. Dad offered me a job at the university, she finally said. Grandpa's fork didn't break stride. Are you going to take it? Yes, she said quietly, her eyes filling with tears. Grandpa patted her hand again. You don't seem very excited. I'm going to miss you. Kat leaned over the table and threw her arms around his neck. He returned the hug, the peppermint smell from his joint cream filling her senses. I'm going to miss you too, pumpkin. Grandpa's voice caught. Kat finally pulled back and plopped into her chair, wiping the moisture from her eyes with her fingertips. Grandpa handed her a napkin. Thanks. That's not for your eyes. What? Kat looked down and found a chocolate smear across her belly. When she'd leaned over to hug Grandpa, she'd flattened the cake. Throwing the napkin on the table, she stood up. I'm going to change. I hope not. Grandpa winked. I think you're great just the way you are. Kat smiled. That's why grandparents are the best. Kat. She paused at the doorway. Yeah. I was planning on your help with this remodeling job I took on this morning. It won't take more than a week. He let the question hang there. Kat was sure he didn't want to ask her to change her plans, but he would need an extra set of hands or two. I won't leave until after it's done, promise. Thanks, pumpkin. As she made her way up the stairs, a big ball of worry settled into her gut. Well, maybe it was a quarter of a triple-layer chocolate cake that made her cramp, but her worries had her mind competing with her stomach. Mulling it over, she realized that she'd never prayed about the decision to leave, and that was probably what created the dissonance in her thoughts. Stripping off her shirt, she tossed it into the garbage in the corner. That stain was never coming out. With a heavy heart, she told herself the decision had been made. Her parents were expecting her. She hoped the Lord was on board, put on another t-shirt, and headed back downstairs to start on the dishes. Chapter 7. Sam took care of as much as he could around his cabin Monday morning, sweeping, mopping, and dusting the place. Now that Chet and Mercedes were back in town, he didn't have to hurry out to the ranch, nor did he have to face Bessie. A part of him wondered how long the Rhode Island red would last. Chet was pretty smitten with Mercedes. Satan's spawn or not, if his wife loved that bird, there'd be no fresh chicken for dinner. Not that Sam blamed Chet. He'd feed a crazy chicken every day for the woman he loved. Before he thought too far into the fact that he'd fed Bessie for Kat and what that might mean, he turned his attention to the long list of chores in the orchard. True to his word, Eli came out to inspect the conveyor belt and gave Sam a fair bid for the welding work. Not one to put off a decision, Sam took Eli's first open day at the end of the next week. Edward O'Shea was the next to arrive at the orchard and followed Sam out to the bunkhouses in his truck. Sam had spent yesterday afternoon clearing the path through the snow with the tractor. They started in the east building and worked their way down the line. I'd like to add a closet to each bedroom. Most of the men have young families, and they could use the storage space. Edward nodded, jotting down notes on a legal pad with a carpenter's pencil. Kat's great at closets. She can work on those. Kat's good at everything, Sam agreed. He liked the way she was willing to throw herself into a new situation, be it moving to Montana, writing books, or building a closet. Edward glanced at him out of the corner of his eye. You ever think of leaving Snow Valley? Sam scoffed. And go where? I don't know, back east, maybe. Sam shook his head. I wouldn't mind visiting, but this is home. He clapped Edward on the back. You know that as much as anyone. Edward had left at 18 and come back at 65. Edward made a mark on the floor with his pencil. The country is in my bones, that's for sure. He turned his tape measure and made another mark. I'll make a quick list of supplies and then head out to Billings. We can start first thing in the morning. Sam caught the "we" in that statement and his heart pounded. We would most likely mean Kat? Anticipation coursed through him. Kat had never set foot on his property. This felt big. Sounds great. I'll stop by and check in on ya. You do that? Edward's voice held a note of demand that caught Sam off guard. Okay, I will, he reassured Edward. I'm headed into town. Do you need anything? I should be good. Edward bent his head over his list and scrawled away. Sam nodded once before climbing into his truck. He waved at his parents, who were repairing the fence line as he drove by. William Buck owned the pastures that lined 3 sides of Miller Orchards. His cattle had gotten through the barbed wire fence yesterday. Thankfully, they left the trees alone this time, but keeping them away from apples and peaches was a constant battle in the summer. About 5 years ago, Sam had bought a small section of his dad's orchard, 20 acres. Enough to give him a start in the business and a place to build his cabin. The purchase was a good beginning, especially since he and his dad shared machinery and split costs. For a while now, Sam headed up the 40 acres owned by William Buck that butted up against his peach trees. He'd made the last payment on his loan a few weeks ago and was ready to make William an offer. William was getting on in years, and his kids wanted nothing to do with their dad or his cattle business. A sad story there. Sam wasn't looking to capitalize on the man's misfortune, but William had approached him about buying the property, and he couldn't let the opportunity pass him by. They were meeting at the local bank this morning to discuss the deal. Just as Sam was about to open the door, a man shoved it open. "Sorry," he muttered. Sam did a double take. "Aren't you the new dentist?" "Yes, sir." "Welcome to Snow Valley Drive." "Wilson. McCoy Wilson." They shook hands. "It's nice to meet you. My mama's been complaining about a toothache. I'm sure she'll be in to see you soon." "I look forward to it." "Drive." Wilson said goodbye and Sam hurried into the small, red brick building. William was waiting for him in the lobby, wearing overalls and a scowl. Sam shook his hand. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Buck." "You too, Sam. If you gentlemen will follow me into the conference room, we can get started," said Timothy Snow, the branch manager. Sam motioned for William to go first. They settled around the table. Timothy took the lead, laying out property values and loan terms and asking about a down payment. Things probably weren't done like this in the bigger cities, with the buyer and seller at the same table, but in Snow Valley, neighbors were good to each other, for the most part. The meeting went well, and Sam was able to leverage the land he already owned to secure the loan. He shook hands with the bank manager and William before leaving the conference room. William wanted to stay behind and discuss the trust he'd set up for his kids. Sam left him to his personal business and made his way to the lobby, where he spied Kat talking to the teller. "Thanks so much. I thought the charge wasn't right. I'm glad I asked." Kat tucked her driver's license back into her purse. "I've never seen fraud this sophisticated. They even used a correct phone number for the company they impersonated. That's what threw me. But then, I knew I hadn't purchased a tanning lamp." Kat laughed. Sam smiled. She had a great laugh. It wasn't high-pitched and annoying, nor was it low and masculine. It was in the alto range and floated over notes, much like her singing voice. He waited so they could walk out together. He wanted to share his good news, with her especially. Somehow, he knew she'd be all the right kinds of happy for him. "Right," agreed the teller. "Here's your new card, and the credit card company will refund your money. They'll investigate this and get back to you if they need any further information." "Thanks, I appreciate that." Kat clipped her wallet shut and stuffed it into her leather fringe purse. Seeing Sam, she smiled wide. "Hi there." "Hi, yourself." Sam held the door open for her. As she came close, he could smell her peach scent. She brushed lightly against him. Man, she smelled good. "What are you doing in town?" Sam lifted himself up to his full height. "I'm buying the land next to my dad's place." "The cow field?" She tipped her head. "Part of it, the 40 acres adjacent to my cabin." "Sam, that's great news." Kat gave him a quick hug, their coats crinkling. Much too quick, the hug was enough to remind him of how perfect she felt in that space. As if he could forget, and yet the feeling hit him anew. "Thanks. I've still got to sign the papers, but it looks like everything's moving forward." "Congratulations." Kat folded the front of her coat around her body and shivered. "Let me buy you a celebratory shake from Big C's." Sam laughed. "If you eat ice cream, you're going to turn into an icicle." Kat groaned. "More like a fudgesicle. I ate enough chocolate cake yesterday to turn me off cocoa for life." Sam put his hand over his heart. "I love your chocolate cake. Is there any left?" he asked hopefully. Settling in around the O'Shea kitchen table was as much of a treat as chocolate cake in Sam's mind. Kat's smile faltered. "Not much. Grandpa helped." "Ah, then I guess ice cream it is." "Great. They walked the half block from the bank to Big C's quickly. Kat sank into her scarf, and Sam tucked his chin close to his chest so his hat could block the wind. They breezed through the door, bringing in a bunch of cold with them. A pile of napkins on the nearest Formica table blew across the floor. "I told Eve not to leave those there," griped Chuck. Big C's owner was indeed big, at least around the middle. He claimed his belly was his best advertising tool. No one wanted to eat hamburgers made by a skinny guy. "Eve, come clean this up." Sam and Kat both squatted to help pick up the mess. Their knees collided, knocking them off balance. "Hey!" Kat grabbed Sam's coat to steady herself. Instead, she pulled them both over as she landed on her behind, her legs shooting out. Sam reached for solid ground so he didn't end up tackling her and put his hand on the floor behind her back, their faces just inches apart. If remembering hugging Kat brought a memory, leaning over her brought desire. Strong, unmistakable attraction coursed through his veins. He couldn't move. Couldn't. He was caught up in the sensations of having her all to himself, like the chicken coop all over again. Only this feeling was pervasive and persuasive. Holding her close had started the fever inside him, and now his whole body flamed. Up close and all sorts of personal, Kat's eyes were kind of amazing. Starting in the center was a ring of deep brown, followed by another of light green, and finally one of gold. He'd never seen eyes quite like hers, but what he found unsettling, in the best of ways, was that they were probing just as deeply into his soul as he was into Kat's. The scent of peaches was strong in the air, and heat pulsed between them. His gaze dropped to her peachy lips and back up again. Kat leaned forward slightly, her hand resting on his chest. Leaning, he encouraged her to move it up and around his neck. She did, ever so slowly. Sam didn't have thoughts about what he was doing. There wasn't a reason to think it through. Kissing Kat was the most natural thing in the world, yet he knew it would be anything but ordinary. Kat's eyes slowly shut and Sam dipped his head. Just before their lips touched, Eve stomped her foot. "I can't sweep with you two mooning over each other." She shook the broom to make them move out of the way. "Sorry," Sam muttered as he got to his feet and offered his hand to Kat. She took it, and a sense of pieces falling into alignment settled into his chest. The air between them hung heavy with a missed opportunity. Kat stood and brushed off her backside. "Thanks." "Anytime." He smiled. Their eyes met, and they both looked away quickly. "What flavor do you want?" she asked as she stepped up to the counter. Her cheeks were flushed and she shed her coat. "Peach," answered Sam. He too stripped off his winter layer. "I really want peaches." Kat pressed her lips together as if she sensed there was more to his choice than just the flavor of ice cream. Sam wondered what the heck he was doing. Kat was in his thoughts more often than not. She had his heart pumping like an irrigation sprinkler under double pressure. He considered the idea that he could have misread the situation. Except she'd moved her hand. That was a clear signal, and he'd taken it, trusting his instincts. "The whole reason I made that stupid New Year's resolution was so could reprogram myself." Needing a moment to clear his head, he considered jumping in a snowbank. Instead, he took a step back and hooked his thumb over his shoulder. "I'll find us a seat." "Okay." Kat turned to Chuck. "One peach shake and one chocolate with marshmallow, please." Sam found a booth as far away from the counter as possible. He nodded to Riker Carmichael as he dumped his tray in the garbage. "Are you still interested in backpacking this summer?" asked Riker. He was a pilot, firefighter, and avid outdoorsman. "Yeah. I'm looking forward to it." Sam smiled. He'd gotten in with a few of the firefighters who helped clear the brush 100 feet from his fence line last summer. They were planning a survivalist-type adventure in the early summer. Sam was looking forward to testing his mettle. "Great. I'll email you the supply list." "Sounds good." Sam settled in the booth while Kat waited for their shakes. He took the time to calm himself down. Once his heart rate slowed, he could think clearly. He and Kat were way past the rule of 3. He saw more of her than any other woman in town. Taking their relationship to the next level would be as simple as asking her on a date. He was pretty sure, after the way she was looking at him, that she'd say yes. The only question was how to work it into their conversation in a casual way. If she turned him down, he'd slink away and avoid Main Street for a few days. After a couple of minutes, Kat sat down, passing the peach shake across the table. "I thought you were all chocolate et out." Sam swirled his spoon around before sampling the flavor. The ice cream was sweet, just like he knew Kat's lips would be. Kat took a bite, closing her eyes and slumping in her chair. "There's no such thing." He chuckled. "Well, thanks for celebrating with me." You made this day all the more special. I'm glad I'm your first friend to find out. I am the first, right? Kat gave him a mock glare, insinuating that she'd take issue with being anything less. Despite her teasing, Sam had gotten the underlying message loud and clear. Friend. That was one signal from a woman he couldn't misinterpret. Friends. Chapter 8. Kat smiled. When she'd seen Sam at the bank, he glowed, with possibilities, probably. Buying his own land was a big deal. She'd learned that much from Chet and his family of ranchers. But when he'd fallen with her, she'd caught a glimpse of those possibilities in his gaze. Sam was a true-hearted man. Uncomplicated, really. Home, the orchard, and family made up the sinew of his soul, and Kat was drawn to that with a strength that took her breath away. Sam's brow furrowed and he cleared his throat. He pulled his legs back from where they occasionally bumped hers and talked into his cup. Yep, you're my first friend to find out. The way his voice dipped on the word friend made it sound like a pledge. She didn't like that at all, but wasn't sure what it really meant. Grateful for the cold cup in her hands, because it helped her keep her focus on the conversation and not on how soft Sam's cotton shirt had been under her palm, she asked the first practical question that came to mind. How does this land thing work? Are you planning to farm it or buy your own herd? I'm expanding my orchard. I thought you worked for your dad. I bought a small chunk of his place a few years back. I'm in the black, so I'd like to move forward. Sounds smart. Sam lifted a shoulder. I have to if I want to get Mar. He looked up in time to see the surprise register on Kat's face. She didn't mean to go wide-eyed, but it wasn't every day that a guy almost used the word married. Guys were dumb like that. They thought if they got near the subject, they'd break out in hives or something. Oh, she knew he wasn't talking about marrying her, but she had no idea that men actually thought about those things. How sweet was that? Sorry. Shoveling 3 bites in his mouth in quick succession, Sam clammed up. Kat looked around the restaurant, finding it difficult to meet Sam's gaze for some reason. Maybe because the idea of being married to Sam had crossed her mind once or a dozen times in the last week. What I meant to say was that if I want to make a go as an orchard owner, then I need more land. Yeah. Sure. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Kat's shake was half gone and melting fast. She rubbed her moist hands on her pant legs before taking another bite. What about you? How's your book coming along? It's a modern western, right? Kat choked on her ice cream. Sometime in the wee hours of the morning, her hero had gone from a bull rider to an orchard owner who wrangled more bees than cattle. He also had a nice set of biceps that stretched his t-shirts to the limit and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. Sam scratched at his scruffy chin. Kat squeaked. It's good. She cleared her throat and her head. Really good. My most realistic and descriptive book yet. Living in Snow Valley is quite the inspiration, isn't it? You've no idea, she muttered into her cup. Grinning, she looked up. I named the mean girl in the story Bessie. Sam barked a laugh. You did not. Grinning, Kat reached across the table and gently slapped his forearm. I did too. She deserves it. You should have seen what she did to my coveralls. Kat's hand flew to her mouth. I am so sorry. It's not your fault. Yeah, but you were doing something nice for me. She took a deep breath. I'll wash them for you. She had no idea how to get chicken droppings out of coveralls, but for Sam, she'd figure it out. He waved her off. Already done? Oh. Her shoulders fell. Taking a wild leap, she asked, Can I make you dinner as a thank you? Is that the going rate for slaying a dragon? Kat giggled. I believe it's dinner and a chocolate cake. She'd make him a dozen chocolate cakes, one for every month of the year. Then she'd make sure they weren't interrupted so the next time he leaned in to kiss her. Sam opened his mouth and then closed it again. He frowned at his almost empty cup before saying, I'll have to get back to you on that one. Okay. Kat shrank into her seat. Despite the heated moment they'd shared, their rhythm felt off. She was planning to leave in a couple weeks, but what if there could be more between them than the occasional heated exchange? Would she be able to leave knowing she hadn't at least tried with Sam? Would he become her one that got away? For some reason, that stupid blank paper came to mind, and she remembered the resolution Grandpa had written in for her. Create romance. She could give it a try, if only so she could leave Snow Valley behind with a clean slate. Kat considered Sam. He'd already refused her invitation to dinner. There wasn't much else going on as of late. In Montana, winters were for sticking close to home. Another minute ticked by. Did Grandpa have any idea how hard real-life romance really was? Candlelight dinners, with Grandpa upstairs, weren't exactly romantic. And shakes, though fun and delicious, weren't exactly inspiring passion. Come on, you're a romance writer, for Pete's sake. Sitting with Sam, not knowing what to say was 10 times worse than staring at a blank sheet of paper and not knowing what to write. Congratulations again. Kat gathered her garbage. The shake she hadn't really wanted was gone, used to fill in the strange silences. Thanks. This was really nice of you. You're a good person, Kat. Sam's words were warm and kind, melting away some of Kat's uncertainty. Hey, anytime you buy 40 acres. Sam smiled. Let's hope that happens a lot in my life. She folded her coat over her stomach and clamped her elbows close to her side. I'll see you later. Bye. Sam held the door, and they were once again where breath froze in the air and conversation was difficult. They both did a quick wave goodbye in the bank parking lot and dove for their vehicles. Kat shivered as Chet's truck came to life. BRRR. Kat had a small economy car. Great for life in Boston, not so great for snow-packed roads. Grandpa had a truck he drove into Billings this afternoon. Chet had a spare truck that he loaned Kat as needed. She'd just stopped at the one light on Main Street when her phone rang. Hi, Grandpa. Hi, Pumpkin. I've got a favor to ask. What? Is Aiden still out for winter break? Aiden was Chet's teenage nephew that they borrowed for projects every now and again. I think so. He has this week off. Will you see if he's interested in earning some money? Kat snorted. He's always interested in earning money. Plus, prom is coming up. Grandpa chuckled. Oh, to be young again. Kat couldn't share the sentiment. Her prom date had gotten drunk in the first hour, thrown up in the punch bowl, and got them both kicked out of the dance. To top off the night, he got handsy, and she had to get self-defense insistent because no wasn't making her point. She'd rather share a quiet meal at home than have another date like that. Although, even getting a quiet dinner with a guy was turning out to be harder than she thought. Sam's hesitancy bugged her. Pumpkin. Grandpa's voice broke through her haze. Sorry, what did you say? I said, I took a job doing some work for Sam, and I'm going to pick up the supplies. Do you want me to pick up a pizza while I'm in town? Town meaning Billings, not Snow Valley. Pizza was one of the few things Kat missed about Boston. Yes. You got it. You're too good to me, Grandpa. You're easy to be good too. They said goodbye and Kat was left, musing over the conversation. What did it say that the only things she could list about Boston that she missed were her parents, pizza, and Tony's gelato? Her flight left in less than 2 weeks, and she hadn't even thought about packing. A move across country should take some time to plan. Instead, she wanted to spend every minute in Snow Valley as if it were her last. Working with Grandpa and Aiden would bring her stay full circle and be just perfect. Speaking of Grandpa, there should be more men in the world like her grandpa. Men who said what they meant and meant what they said. Men who loved the women in their lives more than they loved themselves. She wanted to scream out to the world, where have all the good men gone? Wait, wasn't there a song about that? She did a quick search while she waited for the light to change. Pressing play, she jammed out to Holding Out for a Hero from the movie Footloose, which she found hit too close to home. When the song ended and silence descended on the cab, a quiet voice inside said, Sam is one of those good guys. Dropping her head to the steering wheel, Kat fought the urge to withdraw from the university and set up a permanent residence in Montana. In the end, it was the thought of disappointing her dad that kept her from backing out. After all, nothing was sure when it came to Sam. It was just a feeling. Her head was usually a good guide, and she decided to plunge forward. Time to pull out the suitcases. Chapter 9. That evening, Sam left his boots in his mom's mudroom and made his way into the kitchen. The room was bathed in golden light from the setting sun. Leave Snow Valley? He mentally scoffed at the idea. Not when there are sunsets like this. A fresh pan of cinnamon rolls sat on the stove. Light and extra cinnamony, his mother's rolls were legendary. Sam helped himself, laying 2 rolls on a plate and slathering them in butter. 30 seconds in the microwave, and he had a plate full of amazing in front of him. And yet, he couldn't get excited about eating. Kat had offered dinner. He'd eaten her cooking enough times to know that whatever she served would be worth feeding 1,000 chickens for, and he'd turned her down. Had he gotten so big in the britches that he assumed even Kat was after him? Kat was one of the best friends he'd ever had. She was honest enough to tell him that the faux hawk he'd tried before Christmas was not working for him. She was kind enough to bake and deliver bread for people when they were sick. She was funny enough to turn a phrase that had him laughing even days later. And he'd passed on an evening with a friend because his stupid dating instincts were in the middle of rebooting. Only, his way of thinking about Kat wasn't exactly in the realm of friendship. Holding her to his chest and wrapping her in his arms that day in the chicken coop had awakened feelings inside of him that he'd never known existed, at least where Kat was concerned. And today in Big C's, when Kat had been close enough to kiss, he'd considered it. He'd searched her eyes for a reason he shouldn't kiss her, and had come up empty-handed. Maybe he should have skipped the whole dating thing and just gone for the kiss. Right. And time is found in little bottles on the bottom of the sea, and his dad had a money tree in the backyard. Still, kissing Kat was an idea that held his interest as he worked through the sweet rolls. He'd been ready to ask her out on a real, honest-to-goodness date, and then she'd called him her friend. The dreaded friend. The phrase iced over his invitation like a freeze ray, and so he sat here eating cinnamon rolls for dinner. His mom wandered in halfway through the second helping. "I thought I heard you. How's it going?" "Good. Where's Dad?" He fell asleep in his chair again. Mom poured herself a glass of milk and sat across from him. "I saw you at church on Sunday. You had quite the group gathered round." Sam leaned back. "Not what I was looking for, I'll tell you that much. They were pretty girls." "Yep. But I'm playing hard to get." Funny, he hadn't given Roxy or what was her name another thought after leaving the church on Sunday. Kat, on the other hand. His mom smiled. "What are you thinking about?" Sam blinked. "Just running over the list of things to do before the workers pull in." "I don't think so. That was not a work look. That was a sweetheart look." Sam ducked his head and cut another piece of roll. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Uh-huh." He prayed she'd drop it. Mom plucked at a frayed spot on the placemat. "We appreciate having you around, Sam. Your dad is proud to have you as a partner." Relieved, he replied, "I'm proud to be a Miller." Setting her glass down, she contemplated it for a moment before speaking again. "He's not as young as he used to be. I think that's hard on him, knowing he can't keep up with you." "I hadn't thought about it." "I know. I guess I wanted to say thank you from me, too, for being there for my man. It means a lot to a woman." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "We worry about our guys. I'll always be here, Mom. There's nothing out there that's better than what's here." She patted his hand and then took her glass to the sink. "I'm going to see if I can move my sleeping bear into bed. Good night." "Night." Sam rinsed his plate, then put it in his mom's glass in the dishwasher before heading out. On the short drive home, his mind wandered. It sure would be nice to come home to a kind word and a warm set of lips. Peach lips. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath, trying to capture a hint of peach as if Kat were sitting next to him. The wheel lurched in his hands, jerking him back to the present. Sam swerved, righting his truck on the icy road. His heart rate spiked at his near collision with a snowbank. He needed to focus. And he needed to keep his thoughts on the straight and narrow before he ended up swerving into dangerous territory, on the road or with Kat. Chapter 10. Kat yanked the wrench and gave a grunt. The darn slipnut wouldn't move. "Aiden." Her voice echoed around her in the cabinet under the sink. "Yeah." Aiden answered from somewhere in the room. Kat couldn't see much lying on her side, the upper half of her body in the small cupboard. "I need your muscles." "Oh yeah." He lay down on his side and scooted his head in across from her. "I come in, guns a-blazin'." He grabbed the wrench and flexed his biceps before loosening the slip nut. Kat snorted a laugh. She should be used to the things that come out of Aiden's mouth, but he'd caught her off guard more than once today. When she and Mercedes moved to Snow Valley, Aiden volunteered his time to help Kat and Mercedes fix up their grandpa's house. The now 17-year-old had wormed his way into their hearts as the little brother they'd never had, and they couldn't get rid of him if they wanted to. Not that they wanted to. Aiden was a crack-up, and though he was awfully proud of himself, sometimes his muscles came in handy. A fact that the teenage football player loved. "Anything else?" he asked. "Not now. Thanks." "'Kay, I'm gonna finish painting, then." Grandpa was next door, doing the same repairs to a sink that Kat was doing to this one, and Aiden had been given the task of repainting the front rooms. The bunkhouses were long rectangles divided by cinderblock walls. The paint had long ago started to peel off the brick, and Sam wanted them scraped and painted. Aiden, with the energy of a teenager, was the perfect one to tackle the project. "So, when are you getting married, Kat?" asked Aiden. He liked to throw that one out there every once in a while just to see what she'd say. "A week from Tuesday." Kat yanked the bucket under the open pipe to catch the foul-smelling gunk that oozed out. Covering her nose, she scooted out of the cupboard and sat up, only to find Aiden and Sam staring at her like she'd grown horns. Her heart jumped with something akin to happy panic at the sight of Sam in his work clothes. That man knew how to fill out a jacket. Why hadn't she heard him come in? The guys exchanged an incredulous look. Aiden opened and closed his mouth. For real? Kat scoffed. No. She stayed on the floor, knowing she'd have to go back under the cupboard in a moment. Aiden fell against the wall he'd just finished painting, his hand over his heart. I thought you'd fallen for one of those online stalker guys who promises to marry you and then sells you to human trafficking rings. For real? Kat made a face. Hey, you're getting shirt on that paint. Aiden jumped off the wall, spinning in an effort to see his shoulder blade and resembling a puppy chasing his tail. Sam shook his head and crouched down in front of Kat. Why is it smart men become idiots around you? Kat shrugged. Because I'm stunningly beautiful and can fix a kitchen sink. She patted the messy bun on top of her head. She knew for a fact that there were all sorts of sections falling out, and she probably had paint in half of it. Sam's smile was warm and oh so inviting. There is that. Kat bit her lip, wondering if that was her beauty or the fact that she could install a new kitchen sink. What is that smell? Sam made a face. Your pee trap, replied Kat. Here, take this someplace far away and dump it out, will you? The pipe had finished dripping, so she handed him the bucket full of 6 months of sludge. Sam held it at arm's length. Dragon Slayer to Chicken Whisperer, and now Garbage Man, am I being demoted? Kat smoothed her hand down her pant leg. I prefer the term Renaissance Man. Great, now I'm in tights, Sam grumbled on his way out the door. How's it coming in here? Grandpa clapped his hands and rubbed them together as he came through the front door. Kat wiggled back under the sink. I'm almost finished with this, and Gunslinger over there is done with the wall. Grandpa groaned as he got down on the floor next to her legs. Looks good, pumpkin. I learned from the best. She and Mercedes had often helped their grandpa with repairs on the apartments back in Boston. I'm about ready to head home. We've finished what I had on the list for today, said Grandpa. Kat positioned the pipe and tightened the slip nut before handing the wrench out to Grandpa to put in her toolbox. What's on the list for tomorrow? We're going to build closets. Sweet. Aiden wrapped the foam paint roller in a plastic shopping bag and then removed it from the stick. By the time we're done with you, you'll be able to build a house. Grandpa held out his hand, and Aiden pulled him off the floor, with another groan. His knees weren't what they used to be, and he often iced them before going to bed. Kat had asked, but Grandpa hadn't been to see a doctor yet. She frowned. What would happen if she moved home and Grandpa needed knee surgery? Mercedes and Chet could help. She supposed. Great, I'll build a house for me and Kat, Aiden said. Kat shook her head. You want to marry my girl? Grandpa growled. Aiden didn't have the good sense to look scared. Yaha. What happens if Kat wants to live in Boston? Asked Grandpa. For Kat, I would move to Boston. Wait, are you moving? Aiden looked like he was about to grab her around the legs and beg her not to go. Kat held up her palm like she was stopping traffic. She couldn't bring herself to say the words I'm leaving out loud. In truth, the closer it got to her departure date, the more she wanted to stay. She hadn't even booked her flight. At this rate, she'd be paying double, and she didn't even care. I'm not exactly sure where I belong right now. The feeling of Sam's arms around her enveloped Kat, making her believe that there was one place she belonged. She stared at the floor, not wanting that moment to evaporate. Aiden wiped his brow in an exaggerated show of relief. If you go, there won't be any beautiful women in my life. Don't let Karina hear you say that. Kat elbowed him in the stomach. He looked around as if she had walked up behind him. Don't get me in trouble. You get yourself in trouble. Kat gathered the rest of her tools and put them in their assigned spots in her toolbox. Having a task to focus on kept her from feeling guilty for not telling Aiden the truth. Once she told him, he'd tell Whitney, and then the whole Bauer family would light up her phone, and she couldn't handle the goodbyes, not yet. Sam came back in with an empty bucket and a sour look. That was disgusting. Kat laughed as she took the bucket from him, noting that not a speck of the goo remained. He must have rinsed the bucket with snow. That was nice. We're packing up and ready to head out. Kat watched Sam as he took in the wall and the new plumbing. Grandpa and Aiden carried supplies out to the truck. She should be helping them pick up, but things seemed easy with Sam today, and she wanted that to last. On second thought, her clothes and skin were grungy. Which section is your land? She pointed right and then left. Sam took her hand in his and pointed behind her. His touch did funny things to her mind, and all she could think to say was, "Oh." Sam's eyes took on a semi-seductive quality. "Do you want to see it?" "Yeah." "Great." He perused her jeans and sweatshirt. "Do you have anything warmer?" "My coat's over there." Kat picked up her toolbox. Sam took the box from her hand and carried it out to his old work truck. She grabbed her coat off the hook by the door before shutting it behind them. "I've got a few things you can borrow." He put her tools in the back of his pickup. "I'm going with Sam to see his property," Kat called. "Okay. Have a good time." Grandpa waved and shut the door to his truck. His exaggerated wink was missed by Aiden, who was already in the passenger seat, his hands close to the heater vent, sucking whatever warmth he could get. Kat stomped her feet, her sneakers squeaking against the snow. Sam hooked his finger in her pocket, giving her all sorts of goosebumps. "Come on. Let's get you back to my place." Kat tilted her eyebrow with a suggestive slant. Standing in front of her was a living, breathing cowboy, and she wanted a taste of the country. Oh yeah. There was no denying it. She was smitten. "You're a smooth-talking one, aren't you?" Sam turned red. Not just "hey it's cold out here" red, but bottom of the volcano red. "I didn't mean it like that." "Of course you didn't." What had really happened at the shake shop suddenly became clear to Kat. Their nearly kiss was uncomfortable for him. Caught up in the moment, he almost went through with it but was now grateful nothing had happened between them. To get him out of the friend zone, she'd need a crowbar and flirting skills that were beyond her reach. "I'm just teasing, Sam." She cuffed his shoulder. "Come on, my ears are going to freeze off." The cab of Sam's truck was, thankfully, warmer than the outside temps. He fired up the engine and the heaters blasted warm air. "I don't think I've ever seen your house." She chatted so her teeth wouldn't chatter. Sam shifted and put his arm across the back of the bench seat, his hand close enough to her shoulder to give her ideas about scooting into the middle and leaning against his nicely formed chest. Who knew working in an orchard could create muscles like that? Turning her gaze out the side window, she schooled her thoughts, not needing the heater after all. Chapter 11. It's more of a cabin. Kat grinned. "A bachelor pad, eh?" Sam leaned against the door, where a small breeze came through the cracked window. He sucked in as much of the non-peach flavored air as he could. When Kat had given him that come hither look, his mind had followed the arch of her brow and dipped right into forbidden territory. He'd already issued the invitation to show her the land he was buying, so he couldn't run like Joseph from Potiphar's wife. Sam had a whole new appreciation for the temptation Joseph faced. Not that Kat was asking, or offering, that. But the flirtatious gleam in her eye had him thinking about sampling forbidden fruit, and the ice-cold breeze on his face was a good reminder to keep his thoughts this side of the temperature gauge. I guess you could say that. Before he opened his big mouth, he bit his tongue to keep from explaining that the master closet was big enough to fit a future wife's wardrobe. His clothing filled a fourth of the space, which his younger sister assured him was the correct husband-to-wife ratio for a walk-in closet. They rounded the bend and his cabin came into view. He stopped the truck, clasped his hands, and laid them over the steering wheel. Kat leaned forward in her seat. "I'd love to say it's really cute, with the smoke coming out of the rock chimney and everything, but I don't want to bruise your male ego. Let's call it picturesque." Sam grinned. "You like it?" "It's postcard perfect. There's mounds of snow all round. The green metal roofing is the perfect accent to the rustic log structure. The wraparound porch is ideal, that swing is so inviting. I even love the woodpile over there and the small shed in the back." Sam started forward again. "That small shed is a 2-car garage." "Pardon me." Kat grinned. "Please tell me there's not an outhouse." "Nope. Modern amenities included." "Double ovens." Kat clasped her hands in front of her as if his answer would fulfill her every wish. "There's a nice spot on the west wall with a set of plugs, but I don't cook much so one oven was enough for me." Sam bit his tongue. What was he, a realtor? Kat grinned. "That's smart. I wish the people who'd wired Grandpa's place had thought ahead. We barely got away with adding one extra plug on the circuit breaker." She tipped her head up. "Think of the bread I could make in a set of double ovens. Wouldn't the point be to have one oven for bread and the other for a turkey? On holidays, yes. But a family goes through a lot of bread." Sam leaned away from the door and towards Kat. She didn't seem embarrassed to talk about a future family. Women had it so easy. They could aspire to a home and young ones and not look like wimps. Men, on the other hand, had to tread with care. I guess there are a lot of peanut butter and honey sandwiches for lunch. Honey? The truck rumbled to a stop in front of the house, and Sam pulled out the key. Don't tell me you've never had a grilled peanut butter and honey sandwich. Kat shook her head. They were a mainstay at our table growing up. Stay there, he told her as he came around to her side to open the door. I guess, if you grow your own honey. Sam chuckled. Yes. Growing honey is hard work. Kat started for the front door. What do you call it then? Collecting. We collect the honey. The bees make it. My bad, she joked. Sam reached around her to open the front door. She smelled of tools and dust and those darn peaches. She must have gallons of that shampoo at home. There was something else in there too? Coconut? Altogether, she was a temptingly sweet tropical concoction. Speaking of bees. She looked around. Where do you keep them in the winter? Sam put his hands on her shoulders and turned her to the east. See that small red dot out there? He said in her ear, pointing to the barn about a mile away. She swallowed and then nodded. Her hair was piled on top of her head with small wisps framing her face. They tickled his cheek. When they go into cluster for the winter, we move their hives into the barn to protect them against the cold. Inside the hive it's 90 degrees, but being out of the weather ensures that we don't lose them. Oh, Kat whispered. Too late, Sam realized his hands were still on her shoulders, and he was close enough to kiss her neck if he wanted to. He wanted to. Oh boy, did he want to lean close and press his lips to her soft skin. Instead, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. A temptation like her should be illegal. He could do this. Knowing she wasn't into him the same way made it easier to school his attraction than it would be if she was really interested. The house was comfortable, a stark contrast to the temperatures outside, with a fire in the wood stove. A plaid couch separated the kitchen and the living room, and there was a braided rug under the coffee table that ran right up to the furniture to keep toes warm on cold winter days. Like today. Hurrying to the enclosed back deck where he kept his work clothes and the washer and dryer, Sam grabbed his spare pair of snow pants, boots, gloves, and a knit hat. Kat had come in and shut the door behind her. She hovered near the stove, rubbing her hands. This is great. It's a place set apart from the rest of the world. Thanks. She nodded towards the wall across from her. You could knock out part of that wall and add a bedroom or two. A silly little thrill ran through Sam's stomach at the thought of him and Kat knocking out the logs and building a place together. She would be so much fun to create something with. A room. A shed. A family. Wish there was an antidote for wedding fever. Sam realized too late that he'd caught the bug. His case was bad and getting worse with every moment Kat was in his home. I guess. He handed her the gear, wishing his mind could fight off those kinds of thoughts before he was made aware of them. I'll start the snowmobile and bring it around front. Kat's eyes lit up. I've never been on a snowmobile before. She took off her sneakers, or as she liked to call them, bobos. He never knew why, but he liked it because it was unique to Kat. She had her own way of doing things, ways that didn't make sense and yet were just right on her. You haven't? No, but this would be great book fodder. Book fodder? Yeah, I like to do the stuff in my books before I write them. Don't you write romances? From what Sam knew of romance novels, they involved half-naked people on the covers in suggestive poses. You don't? He cleared his throat. Try everything, do you? Her cheeks turned pink. I write Christian romance. He held up both hands. No kissing. There's kissing. So. Kat laughed as she swatted him with a glove. Stop watching me get dressed and go get a snowmobile? Sam grinned. Yes, ma'am. He gave her a mock salute and used the back door to go to the garage. The minute he stepped outside, the sense of ease he'd felt in Kat's presence evaporated with his breath in a puff of air. Being near her, teasing her, laughing, was all so easy. Too easy for a guy who was trying to reprogram his way of thinking about women and learn how to play hard to get. With Kat, it didn't feel like a game, and he couldn't figure out why. Was it her? Was it because they were friends? Was it because the moment she stepped across the threshold, she'd become a part of the home? He could easily picture her on the couch, pecking away at her latest Christian romance, while he made grilled peanut butter and honey sandwiches. Then they could work together on those kissing scenes. Yanking the pull cord on his thoughts, he fired up the snowmobile. He needed a distraction. No, he needed to change his focus. Focus on the land. Focus on building a business. Then maybe, one day, He could find a woman like Kat. Except he didn't want a woman like Kat, he wanted Kat. Darn that stupid wedding fever. Chapter 12. Kat threw her arms around her sister. You jerk, don't ever get married again. Hey, Chet called from his home office. I can still hear you. He poked his head out of the door. I didn't mean that I don't like you. Kat laughed. Chet, though shy, was much easier to talk to once he'd accepted her as a sister. Well, sister-in-law, but she and Mercedes were so close that he had to throw out the in-law part or suffer the consequences. The happy couple had returned from their honeymoon a few days ago, but Kat promised herself she'd give them time to settle in and hadn't called. It had been torture not to have Mercedes to talk to on a daily basis, and she was giddy with the reunion. Chet disappeared again, and Kat picked up a ball of lumpy dough and began kneading it with practice movements. I've already done that. Mercedes tipped her head towards the countertop. She poured a cup of sugar into a bowl and measured out 1/3 of a cup of cinnamon to mix in. They were making pull-apart bread, one of Chet's favorites. That explains a lot, Kat teased. Mercedes groaned. I'll never get this bread thing down. I'm going to stick to chicken farming. You do that, I almost lost an eye to your dumb birds. It was Mercedes's turn to laugh. You have to treat them like queens. Ha, dragon queens. Kat smiled, thinking of Sam taking on Bessie. Like a knight in dingy work clothes, he'd face the evil Bessie and come off conquering, winning the kingdom and a place in her heart forever. Her hand stilled. Maybe more than just a place in her heart, maybe her whole heart. She was having a hard time getting Sam off her mind. You seem to come out of it okay. Only because Sam saved me. Sam? Mercedes asked with an air of mock indifference. Sam Miller. Yes. Kat was dying to talk to Mercedes about her not-so-mixed-up feelings for Sam, but Chet had already made it clear he was eavesdropping. Instead, she decided to talk about the other big news. Dad called a few days ago. He offered me a position in his department teaching adjunct. Mercedes' spoon paused mid-stir. In Boston. Kat rolled her eyes. No, they're opening a remote location in Snow Valley. Shut up. Mercedes smacked her shoulder. Are you going to take it? She finished with the cinnamon sugar and found a stick of butter in the fridge to melt. I accepted. What a great opportunity. You've already got your bachelor's in education. You could get your doctorate while you teach nights and then move into a full-time position. Yeah. Kat set the dough in a greased bowl, flipped it once, and then covered it with a damp cloth. She put the bowl near the wood-burning stove to rise. The room was quite warm, so it should only take half an hour. I like the idea of becoming a professor. She paused, unable to put into words how conflicted she felt about all this. Taking the job was a calculated move to build a career she could be proud of. And, she'd be closer to her parents. Still, she hesitated. Is it your writing? Couldn't you keep doing that? Asked Mercedes. I wouldn't have as much time if I were going to school and teaching. So you take fewer classes and do it in 4 years instead of 2. Kat had already thought of that, in between remembering how great it felt to ride the snowmobile with her arms around Sam's middle. She'd squeezed tight at first so she wouldn't fall off the back. Then she'd held tight because she'd liked having him close. She liked so many things about him. The way his winter clothes smelled of laundry soap in him. His enthusiasm for what he did. Sam loved farming, or orcharding, or whatever it was called. He loved it as much as she loved writing. The idea of leaving him behind in just a few short days was eating away at her resolve. The land coursed through his veins. She got it, she really did, because she felt compelled to write the stories in her heart. And she could never ask him to leave Snow Valley. To even pose the question would be offensive, like asking him to remove an organ. I know it's possible. She glanced at the open office door, wishing she could lay her heart open for Mercedes to see instead of voicing her feelings. Dad was right, things were changing now that Mercedes was married. She wasn't just her anymore, she was her and her other half. What about Grandpa? She washed the flour and dough off her hands as she talked. He's not getting younger. He groans all the time, and I know his knees bother him. If I go, he'll be alone. Mercedes leaned against the counter. Chet and I are here. And Whitney is right up the road. It's not the same as having someone in the house. He could fall down the stairs or slip in the shower. Mercedes put her arm around Kat's shoulders. And a meteor could hit the earth tomorrow. Aliens could land in our field, Chet called from the office. Good point, sweetheart. Mercedes exchanged a look with Kat, and they burst into giggles. The laughter dissipated the gloomy mood. "We'll take care of Grandpa. You came to Snow Valley with me so I could fulfill my dream of living in the country. It's your turn to chase your dream. Don't forget marrying a cowboy," Chet called. "A hot cowboy," Mercedes called back. "Do you two want to be alone?" Kat asked. "Yes," yelled Chet. "No," replied Mercedes at the same time. Kat lifted her eyebrows. "Ignore him," Mercedes admonished her. "And so it begins," said Chet, laughing. Kat laughed, too. She'd missed their easy banter. Although when she was around Sam, she hadn't missed them as much. Stepping into his house was like walking into her bedroom, familiar and true to something inside of her. She'd loved the rustic decor, like the writer's cottage she'd pictured in her mind, right down to the plaid couch. Although in her head, the rug was a plush, heavy pile, oatmeal-colored thing she could sprawl out on as needed. Would Sam be open to the change? "Kat." Mercedes waved her hand. "Write your romance later. This dough is ready and I have no idea what I'm doing." Relieved that Mercedes thought she'd gotten caught up in a plot line and not rolling out carpet in Sam's living room, she dusted her hands with flour and lifted the cloth off the bowl. The dough had doubled in size sitting next to the warm stove. Perfect. She punched it down and then pinched off a golf ball-sized piece. First dip it into the butter, then roll it in the cinnamon sugar. She demonstrated. Then drop it into the bread pan. We only need to fill it halfway because it will rise again before we cook it. Mercedes' forehead wrinkled as she concentrated on the task. After the first few balls of dough were in the pan, she bumped Kat's hip with her own. "So," she spoke low enough Chet might not have heard, "Sam." Kat couldn't help the heat that crawled up her neck and dusted her ears pink. "I thought so." "Shh." Kat jerked her head towards the open office door. Mercedes pressed her lips together, stifling her giggles. "Do you remember when we first moved here and he cornered me at Ifa?" Kat nodded. They were drawing all sorts of attention from the local cowboys. Sam had asked Mercedes out, more like insisted she accompany him to Big C's. City girl instincts kicked in and they both went running scared. "We were so dumb." Mercedes laughed. "I know. And I was so flustered I left the bucket behind." "Thank goodness, for Chet's sake." Kat grinned as Mercedes flushed. She'd had to borrow a bucket from Chet to finish stripping the wallpaper in the front room. One thing led to another, and now they were in his kitchen making him cinnamon bread, and Mercedes wore his great-grandmother's ring on her left hand. "My point is..." Mercedes' voice dropped even lower, and Kat had to lean in to hear her. "Sam isn't what we thought." "I know." Kat moved the second bread pan closer and put a ball of dough inside. "He's sweet, and kind, and handsome," Mercedes filled in. "Maybe." Kat dropped her dough onto the counter. "You know what I think?" Mercedes rolled her dough around in the cinnamon sugar. "I think you aren't thinking about accepting the position. I think you're thinking about Sam." Kat pressed her lips together. "Maybe," she admitted. "Just be careful." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been writing perfect guys for so long, I'm afraid no one will measure up." "Oh." The statement bothered Kat on two levels. One, she worried that her perception of men might be off. Did she expect too much out of them, for them to be more like her characters than like themselves? The other worry came because Mercedes was her best editor. "Are my male characters that predictable?" she asked. Mercedes rolled her eyes. "No. They're fine." She rinsed her hands in the sink. "I'm just saying, tread with caution, and don't throw away a guy because he isn't perfect." "They can't all be as good as me." Chet wandered into the kitchen. Both Kat and Mercedes rolled their eyes. "You know, your ego is a lot bigger since you married my sister." Kat finished the last of the dough and began wiping off the counter. "Don't worry. I'm sure you'll keep me from getting a big head." Chet folded his arms and leaned against the counter. "What are sisters for?" "I haven't figured that out yet." "Hey." Mercedes threw a dish towel at him. "Mind your manners, Chet Bauer." Even though there was a warning in her voice, Mercedes had nothing but love in her eyes. Turning away from a scene that had become much too tender to share, Kat scrubbed a spot on the counter. Her mind drifted to the manuscript she'd pounded out over the last few late nights. Sam starred on every page. Perhaps, in her head, she'd turned him into the man she'd written. The feelings she had for him, however strong they were, could be figments of her imagination. Throwing the dishcloth in the sink, she flipped around. "I have to go." "I didn't mean that comment about sisters." Chet looked at his wife, as if he'd be sleeping in the barn for scaring off Cat. Cat smiled. I know. I'm good. No worries. She snatched her coat off the back of the couch. I have an idea for a book and I need to get it down. Off with you. Mercedes waved her arm. Go create. Cat grinned. I will. She ran to the truck. I'll create a guy so wonderful I'll never think of Sam in that way again. And then, I'll be free to think clearly about my future. Cat didn't like to admit it, but she'd always felt like she'd let her dad down by becoming an author instead of running the professor track he'd set her on early in life. Following through with this decision was important for their relationship. With barely a hello to her grandpa as she ran through the front door, Cat opened her laptop and a new document. Here we go, she muttered as she began the outline. Time to get Sam out of my head. Chapter 13. Hello. Sam set aside his grilled honey and peanut butter sandwich as he answered his cell phone. While he had the sandwich, it was a small piece of a much bigger daydream. Cat wasn't sitting next to him, her long hair flowing around her shoulders. Somehow, 2 slices of bread and some honey just weren't enough, and he was ticked that he'd allowed Cat into his home, and his head. Everywhere he looked, she was there. He couldn't even go out to his 40 acres without remembering the way her arms felt around his middle and her laughter echoed across the valley. She brought a melody to his life that he wanted to hum over and over again. Sam, this is Timothy Snow at the bank. Hi, Mr. Snow. Your loan has been approved, and we're ready to move forward. Sam pumped his fist. That's great, what's the next step? All that's left is to have you and William sign the papers. Would Friday at 10 a.m. work for you? I'll be there. Fantastic. I'll see you then. They said goodbye and hung up the phone. Sam stared at his plate. He should be happy, darn it all, he should be ecstatic. And yet, there was a hollow feeling in his chest. He had the strangest feeling that he was chasing the wrong dream. Getting up from the table, he slammed his black felt cowboy hat on his head and headed out for the truck. What he needed was a good dose of womanly wisdom. His mom wasn't in the kitchen when he arrived. His dad called out from the living room, "In here." Sam went through the swinging door and found his dad in the recliner with his feet propped up and the beekeeper catalog in his lap. What brings you out this way? I was hoping for some home cooking. Mom around? Nah, she's at something in town. Have a seat. He kicked the couch next to him. Sam pulled up a cushion, running his hands along the worn floral fabric. His mom had carte blanche when it came to decorating, and she made no excuses for adding feminine touches, everywhere. She claimed she needed all the girly things because she spent her days with grouchy men. Sam's dad never complained. He said he could sit on a floral couch just as well as a leather one. Although his recliner was made from camel-colored leather, so maybe Mom let him pick that one. What's eatin' at you? Sam erased the frown on his face and smiled. I just got the news that my loan went through. I signed the papers Friday. That's great. Just great. You're doing yourself proud. Thanks. His dad picked up the magazine and then set it down again. I remember when I bought this place. I was scared to death. You'd just come along, and had a healthy appetite, I might add. Sam smiled. I wouldn't have made it if not for your mother. Really? Dad bobbed his head. I could work myself to the bone knowing that when I walked through that door, I was her hero. The long hours and endless days aren't so bad with a woman like her on your side. Sam dropped his gaze to his socks. His dad leaned over the armrest. All the land in the world isn't worth a dime if you don't have someone to share it with. As if Sam hadn't been looking. I'm taking a break for a while. Scamp. I saw you out riding with that Boston girl. Sam jerked his gaze off the floor and met his father's dancing eyes. She's got spunk, that one, said his dad. That she does. Sam let out a sigh. But we're just friends. Come on, son. I see that look in your eyes, and I've caught you watching her at church a time or two. It was all Sam could do to drop Cat off at home yesterday with no more than a wave. They hadn't talked much, since the snowmobile was loud, which suited Sam just fine. He was getting used to having the pressure of dating off his shoulders. It was certainly much easier to drive through town without worrying about who he was going to ask to the sledding party in February or if he could get someone to partner up and chaperone the high school dance. Of course, being married would have the same effect, but that took a lot more effort. Sam shrugged. She's pretty. But I'm on a break. Says who? Says me. Well, unsay it. Dad picked up the magazine, getting in the final word. Sam tapped his foot. Unsay it. PFT. He got up and paced circles around the coffee table as his mind percolated the thought. If he could unsay he was on a break, Kat could unsay they were friends. Perhaps he could help her change her mind. Unsay it? Sam sat back down and picked up a magazine. He stared at the printed words, not seeing them. Unsay it. Now there was a thought. He vowed that the next chance he got, he was going to give it a try. Chapter 14. Kat used the nail gun to secure the last shelf in place in the small closet. The space was hardly big enough for her to squeeze inside, but the storage space would make living in the bunkhouse for any period of time that much more enjoyable. Kat found that she appreciated Sam's willingness to spend money improving the housing. He didn't have to. The buildings would be occupied for 4 to 6 weeks out of the year and could pass muster as they were. But he cared about the people that came through Honey Fruit Orchard as if they were his extended family. "Kat," called Grandpa from the front room. "In here," she yelled. "Kat." Kat set the nail gun on the shelf and ran out to find Grandpa on his backside, leaning against the wall and holding his left knee. It froze up. He sucked in through his teeth as he massaged his leg. Kat squatted next to him. She looked him up and down. "Can you stand?" "I don't know." She bit her tongue in worry. There was no way she could lift him off the ground. She was tough, but a 200-plus-pound elderly man needed balance. "Maybe if I brace my back against the wall and get behind you." Grandpa scowled. "Yeah, dumb idea. Call Chet." "I'm already on it." Kat had her phone in her hand. She hit send and waited impatiently for the phone to ring 4 times before going to voicemail. He must be in the field. Grandpa nodded. He was going to ride the fence today. A familiar sound bounced off the front of the building. Kat ran out to flag down Sam on the snowmobile. He waved as if she were just saying hi, did a double take, and flipped a U-turn to pull up alongside her. "Where's your coat?" he yelled over the engine before cutting the power. Kat hugged herself. "I wasn't cold until you said that." "Sorry." Sam furrowed his brow. Grandpa's knee locked up. "I can't get him off the floor." Sam was off the machine and halfway to the bunkhouse before Kat finished speaking. She ran after him. "Edward, what were you doing?" Sam took Grandpa's outstretched hand with his opposite one and used his right hand under Grandpa's arm to lift him off the ground as if he weighed no more than a log for the fire. "I was just coming in to check on Kat. We're ready to nail the shelves in the closet next door." Grandpa leaned against the wall. He put his foot out in front of him and made an "I just sucked on a lemon" face when he tried to put pressure on it. "No offense, Kat, but there are some times I wish a lady weren't around." "Grandpa, swear if you have to." Grandpa shook his head. "Swearing won't make it better. Believe me, I tried that before I called for you." Kat's phone rang. She answered, "Mercedes." After explaining the situation, she hung up. "Chet just came in. He and Mercedes will be here in 15 minutes to take you to the doctor. I'm calling right now to get you an appointment." Grandpa scowled. "It still counts if you think the swear words," Kat teased. "Nope. He gets credit for trying to hold them in," Sam countered. "Says who?" "Says Jeremiah 17. Kat narrowed her eyes. "I don't mean to take issue with Jeremiah, but wanting to do good gives you partial credit." Sam winked. Grandpa grinned. "I knew I liked this guy." He patted Sam on the back. "Fine, you get a passing grade." Kat put her arm under Grandpa's. "I just heard Chet's truck." Sam mirrored her posture on the other side. His arm lay parallel to hers, the soft fabric of his heavy coat brushing against her skin. She blushed as she gave his arm a squeeze, just to say thank you, not to flirt. They managed to get Grandpa out the door and into Chet's truck without any mishaps. Kat waved as they drove away. Mercedes had the doctor's info. Someone had to stay behind, finish the job, and clean up. Kat patted her pockets and let out a groan. Grandpa's got the truck keys. Sam waved towards his snowmobile. "No problem. I can give you a ride home. I should probably finish up that other closet so Grandpa doesn't think he needs to come back tomorrow." It was the last one on their list, and then the job was done. "What can I do to help?" "Nothing, you aren't paying us so that you can do the work. If you want to come back in an hour, I should be packed up and ready to go." An involuntary shiver overtook Kat. "Brrr." Sam put his hand on the small of her back and guided her into the bunkhouse, shutting the door behind them. The gesture made Kat feel taken care of, allowing her fears about her grandpa to come to the surface. She tipped her chin up to keep from crying. Grandpa's knee was hurt. It wasn't his heart. He didn't have a stroke. He was going to be fine. Yet Kat didn't like the sense of vulnerability that came from finding him stuck on the floor. Sam put one arm around her shoulders. He'll be okay. I know. I just hate seeing him get older. She smiled, but the effort felt weak on her part. He's always been the he-man in the family and... She bit her lip. Sam wrapped both arms around her and pulled her into his chest. She buried her face in his neck and breathed in the scent of him. He smelled like fabric softener and body wash, two smells she really enjoyed. Really enjoyed. Like, a lot. With hot fudge on top. Thanks, Sam, she whispered. He squeezed her tightly and then took a step back. Let's get that closet done. Kat rolled her eyes. He was set on staying, and she found that she wasn't all that set on sending him away because he was two ways solid. The first way Sam was a solid guy was his strength, and she could use that when it came to lifting the shelves into the closet. Plus, that meant the view from her office was pretty nice. Sam had a great set of shoulders. She'd always liked guys with broad shoulders. The second way Sam was solid was in his ability to handle life. He'd been through some pretty tough times, gotten a bad rap here and there, and yet he was always friendly and kind to everyone. Solid. A good, solid man. The kind of man that made her feel better just having him around, at least until she heard how things worked out for Grandpa. She might need a hug again. A longer hug. I have to nail the last section in here, and then we can move everything next door to do that closet. Sounds good. Sam stripped off his coat and hung it next to Kat's on the set of hooks. She put in the 6 nails, and then they hauled the air compressor and nail gun next door. Grandpa had cut the shelves and laid them out on the floor. Sam picked up the closest shelf and tried to place it on the wood strip. It didn't slide into place. Kat? I think we have a problem. Kat smiled. She stood in the closet doorway. Let me see. Sam pulled the shelf out and placed it in her hands. He was only inches away, and Kat had to tear her gaze from his cobalt eyes. There should be a number here. She pointed to the upper right corner, where a number 2 was written in carpenter's pencil. And a matching number here. She reached past Sam to point to the back right corner of the closet, where there was a number 2. See, they have to match up, and then the shelf should fit just right. Sam hadn't turned to look in the closet. He reached out and brushed a wisp of hair off her cheek. Kat froze, her arms still in the closet, bringing her body nearly flush with Sam's. I didn't think to check fit, admitted Sam, his eyes dropping to her lips. It's a must. Sam's hand moved to her cheek, his eyes moving between her gaze and her lips. I think I'd better check it now. Every fiber of her being understood that they'd stopped talking about shelves and started talking about their lips. Kat was pretty sure they'd be a good fit, the kind of fit that a girl never forgot. That would probably be a good idea. A quick smile splashed across Sam's face. His fingers slid behind her neck and he pulled her in. Kat forgot to breathe. She forgot to think. She forgot about closets and nail guns and air compressors and grandpas with bum knees and just married sisters and job offers. All that existed was this moment. Sam's fingers brushing her skin. The fresh air smell in his clothes and the warmth building in the bottom of her belly. Her eyes dropped shut, and his lips pressed hers, causing her arms to reach for something solid. Fortunately for her, Sam was a solid guy. His other arm went behind her back, holding her up as she melted into his kiss. Turning her head, he deepened the moment, backing Kat against the closet door and taking both his hands to her face. Kat's arms wound around his neck and she held on, enjoying every moment, every brush, every warm breath. Sam slowed the kiss and touched his forehead to hers. Kat still hadn't opened her eyes. She sighed, happy to let the kiss linger between them. Sam didn't seem in a hurry to move either. Good fit, she whispered. Chapter 15. Sam dropped his lips to her neck, leaving a warm trail of kisses. I'd say. Kat giggled. I see why you enjoy carpentry. He moved up to her jaw and then over to that sensitive spot behind her ear, relishing having her in his arms at last. Unsaying his New Year's resolution was the easiest decision he'd made to date, and Kat had unsaid her only friends with that kiss. All in all, unsaying was his new favorite thing to do. There's just something about closet design. Kat laughed and squirmed. That tickles. Sam laughed. What? This? He nuzzled her neck. Sam. She squealed. He loved it. He loved hearing her laugh and being the reason for it. Kat's laughter warmed his heart. He tickled her side, and she jumped. Sam. Gathering her into his arms where she melded into him, fitting into all the right spots, he let his heart have full reign. "Katrina O'Shea, can I take you to dinner?" Kat nodded against his shoulder. "I'd like that." He kissed her head. "Then we'd better get this done?" "Wait, tonight." Her hand flew to her hair. "Sure." Sam shrugged. "Sam, I'm a mess." She tugged at her hoodie. "I need a shower and some time with a flat iron end." Sam took both her hands in his to stop her fidgeting. "You look beautiful, and I'd take you to the fanciest place in Billings right now and have the prettiest girl in the state." Flushing, Kat ducked her chin. "The things you say." As much as Sam had enjoyed making Kat laugh, he found that there was a part of him, the deep down part where loyalty and faith and love took root, that thrilled at making her blush. He had a feeling he'd spend the better part of the afternoon planning compliments that would bring color to her cheeks. He pressed a kiss to her temple and reached down for another shelf. Pointing at the number in the corner, he said, 1. Kat pointed to the bottom shelf. "The match." "I like matching things up." Sam wiggled his eyebrows. Kat giggled. He held the shelf in place while Kat leaned against him and secured it with the nail gun. They worked quickly, and all too soon the closet was finished. As they were hauling the equipment out to Grandpa's truck, Sam was thankful he'd thrown out his New Year's resolution. There was no point in missing out on this much happiness, not when it came in a hoodie and jeans and tasted like sweet peaches. Chapter 16. Kat kept a watchful eye on the clock as she got ready. Sam said he liked her with messy hair and in an old pair of jeans. Well, he was about to find out what he was missing out on. Her long caramel hair hung down her back in soft waves. Since it had been flatter than a nail this afternoon, she added root volume spray and scrunched for a sexy bedhead look. Not that she wanted to put ideas in Sam's head, but taking his breath away, instead of the other way around, would be a bit satisfying. Her sweater dress hugged all the right spots, and the wide leather belt accentuated her waistline. The matching knee-high leather boots had a small heel. Nothing that would make her unsteady on her feet if he decided to kiss her again, but just enough to bring Sam into easy kissing distance, a thought that sent little thrills through her body. Loping down the stairs, she stepped through the wood arch and into the living room. Grandpa had his knee propped up in his recliner. Surgery had gone from a something in the future to a let's talk scheduling thing today. Grandpa wasn't happy about it. He liked his freedom. The doc had assured him that, after the surgery and rehab, he could return to his regular activities. Grandpa was being grumpy about it all. Chet sat on one end of the couch with his arm across the back cushion, and Mercedes leaned against his chest, her feet tucked up behind her. Chet twirled a piece of Mercedes' hair between his fingers as they watched an old John Wayne Western. He glanced back and saw her standing in the doorway. "You look nice, Kat." Mercedes pushed off his chest and took in Kat's outfit and voluminous hair. "Wowza, girl." Kat laughed. That was exactly what she was going for. She only hoped Sam had the same reaction. "Thanks." She kissed Grandpa on his bald spot. "You be good." He harumphed his reply, which Kat took for an "I love you too." She'd be grumpy too if the doc had put a large needle into her knee that afternoon. Fortunately for her, she'd been on the receiving end of something much more wonderful than medical prodding and poking. Usually, her daydreams included her book boyfriends and their romantic administrations. She'd disappear into her imagination for a few minutes here and there to try out different scenarios. When the right one came together, she'd write furiously. Today, Sam's kisses continually played through her mind, making her sigh. Creating romance was a lot of fun when Sam was involved. Leaning over, she gave Grandpa a hug. "Thank you." "For what?" "For my New Year's resolution." The pain and crankiness ran out of the lines on his face as he brightened. One of the things she loved about watching Grandpa's face was the way it could change in an instant. When he smiled, his eyebrows went up, wrinkling his forehead but allowing light to fill his eyes. His cheeks lifted, and his ears dropped a quarter of an inch. "You deserve it, darlin'." Kat kissed his cheek. The doorbell rang, and she found herself in a race with Chet to open it. Chet beat her, his hand landing on the knob first. "Darn these boots." Kat pulled back and stuck out her tongue. With a wicked grin, Chet pulled the door open. "Evening, Sam." Kat pushed up to her tiptoes to see over Chet's shoulder. Sam looked gorgeous in his black felt cowboy hat, button-up emerald green shirt, and holding a bouquet of pink daisies and roses. "Evening, Chet," Sam replied. Kat smacked Chet's shoulder, but he didn't move. She kept a smile on her face. It was sweet of Chet to take on the role of big brother. But she was a big girl. And, he was blocking her view. "You here for Kat?" Like he didn't know. Yep. Sam winked at her, and Kat relaxed. Where are you two headed tonight? Hey, Chet. Kat tapped him on the shoulder. If you're going to interrogate Sam, could you at least do it inside the house? You're letting all the heat out. Shut the door. Yelled Grandpa and Mercedes from the front room. The January air crept over the distressed barnwood flooring and must have snaked into the living room. Chet sighed and motioned Sam in, shutting the door behind him. Sam handed the flowers to Kat, his cheeks flushing almost as pink as the daisies. Kat leaned in and smelled the sweet blossoms. Thank you. They're beautiful. They reminded me of you. Janet at the flower shop said pink roses are a symbol of grace and elegance. Sam stuffed his hands in his pockets and rocked back on his heels. Kat's heart did a jig. Sam said the darndest things, all sweet and sugary, as if they just rolled off his tongue. I love them. Thank you. Chet folded his arms. He really was a dear, and Kat appreciated his obvious concern on her behalf, but it was time for him to go away. She reached for her coat. Thanks for staying with Grandpa tonight, she said in a low voice. Grandpa hated the idea of a babysitter. Sure. Mercedes came into the entryway. Oh, let me take those for you. She smelled them too. Hi, Sam. Hi, Mercedes. Kat grinned as she handed over the flowers and darted her eyes towards Chet in a silent plea for Mercedes to haul him away. Mercedes hooked her elbow through Chet's. Come on, I might need your height to reach the vase. Sisters are awesome. Sam took Kat's coat. Let me help you with that. He held it open, and she slipped one arm in and then the other. He settled it onto her shoulders, and his hands lingered. Kat leaned back, feeling his solid chest against her coat. He quickly kissed her cheek. You look beautiful. Thanks. You look great. I love that color on you. Mercedes and Chet were coming out of the kitchen. Let's go. Kat grabbed Sam's hand and pulled him outside before Chet could corner them again. Once in the fresh air, with their breath in puffy clouds and the porch light dusting their hair, Kat gave herself over to the joy of being with Sam. So where are we going? I made reservations in Billings, but there's a storm warning, so I thought Granny's kitchen would be better. Sam opened her door. Sorry. I wanted our first date to be a little more special than a diner, but we're limited on options here. Kat bit her lip. Sam wasn't embarrassed to say those sweet little things that made her heart fly out of the park like a big poppy home run. She could say them too. It doesn't matter where we go, it's special because I'm with you. Sam leaned into her hand, melting as if her words had been a warm blanket and he'd just come in from the cold. He gathered her into his arms and squeezed her tight, lifting her up off her toes. Yep. You're real. He grinned as he put her back on her feet. Kat laughed. Thankful she'd watched a YouTube video about getting in and out of a truck without revealing your innermost secrets. She hopped into the cab with ease. Sam shut her door and ran around to the other side. Kat bit her lip. The anticipation of an evening with her cowboy prince bubbled inside her. There was that nagging worry about the clock striking 12 and her flight for Boston. Things would work out. They had to. Chapter 17. Even though dinner hadn't been at the posh restaurant he'd planned, it was nevertheless the best dinner of Sam's life. They hadn't lacked for topics of conversation. Not once had he found her glancing at her phone or checking the clock on the wall. When he helped her into the truck, her hand on his shoulder and her eyes on his, Sam counted himself the luckiest son of a gun in Montana. Where to? Kat asked as he slammed his door, shutting out the evening cold. It was only 8:30, but the temperature had dropped below 20 degrees. There was snow in the forecast, and things could get ugly quick. Starting the truck, he let the engine warm up before turning on the heater. Thankfully, they didn't have long to wait. Would you like some dessert? Sam smiled. Kat's hand went to her belly. After the steak I just pounded down. Sam laughed. He'd enjoyed watching Kat enjoy her meal. How many women had he taken out who had, with sour faces, picked at a salad or slurped soup? He once again wanted to touch her, just to see if she was real. Hooking his pinky finger through hers made his heart jolt. It's chocolate. Kat perked up. In that case. For once, Sam was upset at himself for buying a newer truck with bucket seats. In his old clunker, he'd had a bench seat, which made it easy for girls to sit close while he drove. Kat seemed too far away even though she was in the seat next to him. How often do you talk to your parents? He asked for the sake of conversation. Kat's hand flinched. Sam turned up the heater. A couple times a week. We don't schedule calls, just pick up the phone when we miss one another. I can't imagine living that far away from my parents. Why not? I've always wanted to work with my dad. He was like Superman to me growing up. He had big, strong hands that could bend branches out of the way if needed. And he taught me things through example that made me love him even more. Like what? Kat turned her knees towards him. Sam thought for a moment. It wasn't that it was hard to come up with something wonderful to share about his dad. The difficulty came in the choosing which anecdote to share. Like, one time, a wife of a worker. And you have to understand, this guy had been a jerk all week. He demanded payment at the end of each day and never worked a minute past quitting time. Anyway, she fell in the cabin and hit her head on the corner of the bed. She needed stitches, but they couldn't afford to take her to the hospital. Dad took her into old Doc Taggart and paid for the bill right there. He taught me to care about people and what happens to them, even if they wouldn't do the same for you. Kat smiled softly. Did you ever see the worker again? Sam grinned. Jorge is our crew manager now. See, Dad saw what I couldn't. He saw the fear in Jorge's eyes. He didn't act that way to be a jerk. He wanted payment so he could feed his kids, and he quit right on time so his wife didn't have to worry about being alone in the bunkhouse when the single fellas got off work. Not that anything bad has happened before. Sounds like a good person. Dad or Jorge? Both. Kat laced her fingers through his and leaned her head back. She looked content just to ride alongside him. Sam was struck with a sense of finding truth in a dating world full of uncertainty. He pulled past his cabin and parked in front of the garage in the back. Are we eating in a barn? Kat leaned forward to peer into the darkness beyond the headlights. Technically, it's a garage. Sam pulled the door handle and exited the vehicle. He opened Kat's door and helped her out. Her sweater dress slid right off the leather seats. He'd never seen a sweater dress before, but he liked the way it was soft on the eyes and to the touch. Not that he'd touched more than Kat's lower back tonight. And not that he had plans to touch anything else. Wanting to throw a snowball in his own face for his wild thoughts, Sam led her through the small door and into the heated garage. That afternoon, he'd swept the cement floor and moved the snowmobile and four-wheelers to the back. Then, he'd set up a small card table and covered it with one of his mom's lace tablecloths. 2 black folding chairs sat on opposite sides, and 3 candles waited to be lit in the center. He stepped around Kat and lit the wicks. Then he lit the lanterns hanging along the walls and turned off the overhead lights, bathing the room in a soft glow. Kat gasped. Sam Miller, you're quite the romantic. Sam hoped the lights were low enough that she couldn't see the heat rush up his cheeks. Don't tell Chet. Kat pressed her lips together and pretended to lock them with a key. Sam put his arm around her waist. Now don't go locking those away just yet. I'm hoping to make good use of them later on. Kat smiled, ducking her head. How much later on? Sam tipped her chin up. Not that much later. How about no later? No later is good. He leaned down and sampled her lips. They were warm and inviting. He kissed her slow, with the intent of showing her how much he enjoyed her company, how much he was beginning to care about her. Kat's lips moved with his and her arms found their way around his neck. She tipped his hat back, and he felt her smile against his lips. Eventually, he had to force himself to pull away or he'd stand in his garage and kiss Kat all night long. Question. Kat's eyes sparkled. Go ahead. He ushered her into a seat. How many cowboy hats do you own? Sam reached behind him and pulled a sealed plastic container out of the small beverage fridge. This felt hat and a working felt hat. The tan one? Yep. He took off the lid and dished them both a serving of chocolate pudding cake with whipped cream. Then I have a dress straw hat and a work straw hat as well. Why do you have 2 dress hats and 2 work hats? The felt hats are warmer, so I use them in the winter. Straw hats are lighter and have ventilation for working in the sun. Why? Research, Kat replied. She tasted her pudding cake, closed her eyes, and sighed. This is good. Thanks. I bought them at the bakery. Kat laughed. I was going to ask for the recipe. It's a few dollars and a few minutes in line. I think I can handle that one. Research for what? Kat licked her lips. A book. Uh-oh. Am I in one of your books? Kat's eyes could have bored a hole in the tabletop. Not you specifically. But I do write a few cowboys. I'll have to read one sometime. Kat shook her head quickly, sending her curls to bouncing. They're really more for women. Sam got the impression she had something to hide, but since she sold her books on Amazon, he couldn't imagine that she'd think it would stay a secret, whatever it was. He wasn't too worried. Cat was too honest to do anything to cause him grief. Have you ever two-stepped? Sam asked as they finished off their dessert. Nope. Cat dabbed her lips with the napkin. Well then, you've never really danced. He held out his hand. Cat shrugged. Smiling, she took his hand. He set his phone on the table and started his playlist. George Strait began to sing, and Cat tapped her foot to the beat. Are you going to throw me over your shoulder or anything? Sam put his right hand on her hip and lifted her hand with his other. She automatically placed her fingers at the top of his bicep. In traditional two-step, her hand would be closer to his shoulder with his elbow held high, but he wasn't too worried about form. He was more interested in holding Cat close. Moving slowly, he showed her the basic steps, and pretty soon they were making the circle around the room. Sam counted, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. Stop looking down. Sam lifted her chin. If I don't watch them, my feet will misbehave, said Cat. At that very moment, she missed a step. Sam pulled her closer to him. Try not thinking so hard and feeling more. This close, he could sense the movements of her body and anticipate them. He could also use his body to lead. Cat found the rhythm, and their feet step quick-stepped in sync. Nice enough that Sam stopped counting and worked in a spin here and there. The first song ended and the second one started up. The two of them didn't even slow down. By the third song, Sam was able to spin her out and away and bring her back, their arms tangled in harmonized chaos. Cat smiled, giggled, and sighed intermittently, making it difficult for Sam to pay attention. Ha! She winked when they'd completed a more advanced move. Sam pulled her close, his feet slowing and his heart rate speeding up. Sure, they were in his garage with a few old lanterns and some candles, but it might as well have been a ball at Buckingham Palace. Cat was worth more than the crown jewels in his eyes. He brushed his finger across her cheek, amazed at how soft her skin felt and the acceptance he found in her gaze. Every moment up to this point flashed before his eyes, and he could see the dance they had done that brought them together. His uncertainties and doubts, her desire to be friends first. All of it choreographed to bring them together in this perfect moment. It was that very look of acceptance that stirred a yearning in his soul. The first time Sam attended a wedding was when he was 15 years old. When Pastor John said love and honor, Sam's thoughts got stuck like a truck in a mud bog. He looked up the meaning of honor that night and found the synonyms esteem and reverence. Slamming the dictionary shut, he vowed that he wouldn't get married until he found a woman he could esteem and reverence. Cat was that woman. He was awed that she, the most beautiful and tender person in Montana, would want him. Overwhelmed with the love building inside, Sam took her face in his hands. As Clint Black serenaded them, Sam kissed the woman he'd been born to love. Chapter 18. Sam bounded out of his truck. He was taking Cat snowmobiling behind his cabin, and then they were going to watch a movie with Mercedes and Chet. Since he could easily get lost in Cat if they were alone, he decided double dating was a good idea. I've got it. He heard Cat yell from behind the closed front door when he knocked. Her footsteps pounded down the stairs, and then the door flew open and she was rosy-cheeked and smiling. Hi. Hi back. Sam stepped in and Cat stepped into his arms. Are you ready to go? Yes. Grabbing her jacket, Cat popped her head into the living room. I'm going snowmobiling. Do you need anything? She asked her grandpa. He'd been up and about the last couple of days. He'd even finished the painting for the bunkhouses, with Aiden's help. Cat said that the shot seemed to do the trick. Sam was happy to see her worry gone, and he was glad that Edward was moving again. Edward lifted a hand. I'm good. Have fun. We will. She threw her arms around his neck, and Sam smiled against her lips. She did this spontaneous kiss thing that stirred his heart. He wasn't used to it, and he hoped he never would be. Not too much fun. Edward called. Cat laughed. Her phone rang, and he pulled back enough for her to reach it in her pocket. Now that he had her in his arms, he didn't want to let go. They could go snowmobiling any time. She answered without checking the caller ID. Hello. Sam pressed his lips to her temple, drinking in the peach and sawdust scent that was uniquely Cat. Being this close meant he could hear the person on the other line. Hi, honey. How are things? Cat winked at Sam. Things are good. Sam kissed her neck, knowing she would giggle. She swatted at him. He stopped, but only because he hadn't met her dad yet and didn't want to make a bad first impression. I went ahead and scheduled your flight with our extra miles. Your mom and I will be at the airport to pick you up. Cat went stiff in his arms. That's great. The whole department is taking you to lunch on your first day. Kat looked at him with a mixture of panic and remorse. Flight? Sam's hands went cold? First day? That didn't sound good at all. Kat looked up at Sam. Dad? I've got to call you back. I can't wait to have you home, honey. With Mercedes marrying Chet, which we're happy about, don't get me wrong, we've missed you. We were planning on you both coming back and I can't tell you what this means to your mother and I. Sam's arms dropped. Thanks, Dad. I love you. They said goodbye, and Kat slipped the phone back into her pocket. Sam. She reached for him. Sam stepped back. You're moving? Kat blew out a heavy sigh. Yes? I mean, there's this job. She stared at her boots, not even bothering to look him in the eye. Then what was this? He wagged his finger back and forth between the two of them.
I didn't plan on this. I mean, I want it but I can't pass up this opportunity and my dad. She bit her lip.
I see. He did see. He saw all too well. He'd followed his gut, and his heart was tossed aside. Congratulations. Sam. Kat's hand went to her neck and she brushed her fingers over the spots he'd kissed. Only minutes before, he thought he had found his partner. His eternal best friend. The woman he could start a family with, and she'd played him. Her kisses hadn't felt fake, they felt like love and tasted sweeter than blackberry honey. If he had known better. He'd vowed to use his head and not his stupid instincts. I've got things to do. Like sign up for a heart transplant. Even though he'd been down this road before, this one hurt. If you don't mind, I'm going to take a rain check on the movie. If he stayed any longer, he'd crumble. He bolted from the house, looking like a coward but somehow not caring. Sam. Kat called behind him. He didn't slow down. His breath came in jagged chunks. He blamed it on the cold, constricted feeling around his chest. Winters in Snow Valley were like that, they could freeze the breath in your lungs. The truck heater didn't bring him relief. He finally pulled over and clutched his fist to his chest. There was only one reason Kat could hurt him so deeply: he loved her. He loved her, and she was leaving. Groaning, he bumped his head against the headrest. Chapter 19. A week passed, and the pain still crushed him. Sam had held the perfect woman in his arms, and she'd run away. He could easily forgive and forget the other women who had played him. After all, dating was a game. But Kat wasn't a game to him. She was the real thing, yet he'd lost. He'd lost so much more than he'd realized was on the line when he walked out that day. He'd lost love. He'd lost his future wife. He'd lost their children. He'd lost the ability to dream of a life beyond being single. No wonder he was a mess. Staring at the clock, he watched the minutes tick by, knowing that the bank manager was probably trying to get hold of him right now. He'd shut his phone off last night and not bothered to turn it on again when he woke up. He couldn't bring himself to go into town and sign on the dotted line. The dream no longer felt attainable. He didn't need more land. There wasn't a point to working himself to death if there wasn't anyone at home to remind him why he lived. Without Kat, there was nothing. Keep your head down, Sam. Keep your head down, and don't think about how perfect you almost had it. Chapter 20. To enter the quiz scores, you go here and then select the student. They're listed in alphabetical order. Kat nodded numbly. A week had gone by since she'd watched Sam's truck slip and slide its way down the road, carrying Sam right out of her life. She'd packed up her clothes, boarded a plane, and hugged her parents at the airport. Her mom hovered, sensing something was amiss in Kat's heart but not pressuring her to share. She was so different from Grandpa that way. He would have planted his behind on her bed and folded his arms, waiting for her to spill her guts. However, the privacy was welcome as Kat sorted through her emotions. Each day was lonelier than the last and void of the romance she'd come to love. She'd published the book about the orchardist, having finally looked up the title for One Who Owns an Orchard. The manuscript was well received by her readers, and she was almost done with the one she'd started to keep her mind off Sam. The plan wasn't working at all. Once again, he was on every page. Whether it was his tan work hat or his creased leather boots, Sam was in her every thought. And she didn't feel any better. If anything, the hole in her heart had widened with time. Training for her new position as an adjunct faculty member didn't take her mind off Sam either. Eating dinner with her parents didn't fill the gap where his laughter once resided. Lying in her old bedroom didn't bring the comfort his arms could produce. Everywhere she looked was emptiness. Kat? Asked Tom, the department secretary tasked with Kat's orientation. Alphabetized names, she repeated to let him know she'd heard. It didn't matter if she listened. She could always ask her dad for help if she needed it, and as Tom took her to another screen, Her mind was taken back to Sam's garage and a lantern-filled night of chocolate and dancing. She thought she'd missed the glitz of city life, but Boston was no longer her home. Her home was in Sam's arms. Silently, she prayed for confirmation. Where was she supposed to be? Here, pretending to be a professor, or in a log cabin tucked away in Snow Valley? The longer she thought about Sam, his home, his orchard, his kiss, the stronger the burning sensation in her chest. Unable to withstand the prompting to act, she got to her feet. "Excuse me?" Tom stopped mid-sentence and lifted one gray eyebrow. "Yes. I have to go?" "Go? But we're only halfway through the orientation packet." "I'm sorry. But I have a plane to catch." "A plane?" Kat left a sputtering Tom in her wake as she ran through the halls, determined to right the wrong she'd done. "Dad!" She burst into his office. Her dad started as if she'd shot a gun into the air. Kat smiled. Montana, with its wide-open sky and life lived by the land, was in her blood. She pushed forward, feeling strong in the knowledge that she loved Sam and that the Lord was cheering her on. "Dad, thank you so much for this opportunity, but I can't stay here." "Katrina." Dad's tone was full of censure and confusion. "I haven't been entirely upfront with you and Mom." She squared her shoulders. There was more to this moment than confessing her feelings for Sam. It was time to claim the woman she'd become. The person she'd made herself into. The person she was proud to be. "When I moved to Snow Valley, I switched from writing historical novels to historical romance novels, and I love it. I love what I do. I don't want to teach here. I don't want to teach anywhere. I want to be an author." She took a deep breath and plunged forward. "And I met a man who is every bit the gentleman. He's sweet and innocent and says the best things, and I don't want to be without him. I'm going back to Snow Valley and back to Sam." Dad took his glasses off and wiped them with the bottom of his polo shirt. "Katrina, I'm not even sure what we're talking about." "I know, Dad. I know. It's a mess, a beautiful mess." Kat cried and laughed at the same time, thinking of Sam calling her that very thing, a beautiful mess. He'd seen it all along. "Did you say romance novels?" Dad's forehead creased. Kat laughed. "Christian romance. Why do I always have to explain that part?" "Ah." He looked relieved and confused. "Kat, this is the first time since you've been home that you've looked happy. Above all else, that's what I want for you. That's what I've always wanted for you." She hugged him fiercely. "What about the faculty position? Maybe I'll pick up a couple night classes. Sounds like we'll be flying back to Snow Valley for another wedding. Maybe you should retire there." "I'll have to think about that one. Your mom loves her shopping. And Tony's gelato." "Ah, gelato." Kat laughed. "Thank you, Dad. I love you, kiddo." He hadn't called her that in years. "Now, go get your cowboy." "How'd you know Sam's a cowboy?" "My girls seem to have a thing for them." Dad settled in behind his desk. He'd taken everything in stride, although Kat wasn't sure he had processed the whole romance writer thing yet. That might be a conversation for another day. Until then, she'd focus on getting herself back to Snow Valley and doing what she should have done in the first place, romance the gray velvet hat right off of Sam. Chapter 21. Sam took to walking around Snow Valley instead of driving. The cold air reminded him that he could feel something since his heart had gone numb. He figured that's what happened when the hopes and dreams leaked out like a balloon with a hole in the side. Stuffing his felt hat low on his head, he trudged up Main Street, avoiding big C's because it reminded him of peaches and cat and amazing kisses. He headed towards Dove's instead. Not paying attention, he nearly ran into someone coming out of the bank. "Excuse me, ma'am," he muttered. "I don't believe I will," replied Kat, her hands at her hips. With a grin, she threw herself against him. His arms reacted, holding her as close as their coats would allow. It can't be. But Kat wasn't in Snow Valley. She was across the country, and his mind was playing cruel tricks on him. "Sam." Kat bounced on her toes. Sam didn't return the sentiment. He'd had several startlingly real dreams of holding Kat again, but this one took the prize for most real. He could even smell peaches. Kat pulled back and met his gaze. "Sam." Shaking his head, Sam moved to go around her, hoping the dream would end with him resting in his cabin. Although that wasn't how these dreams usually went. He usually woke up in a cold sweat from watching Kat run away while his boots had been nailed to the floor and he couldn't follow. He tucked his chin to his chest and focused on the snowy sidewalk. "Sam." Kat grabbed his arm to slow him down. Her tug felt real, and Sam was starting to think he wasn't dreaming. Stomping his feet brought about a sense of tiny needles. He was awake. And Kat was here. He rounded on her, angry and hurt that she'd left and confused that she was standing in front of him and so darn happy to see her clutching a folder and grinning like everything was right in the world when everything was not right. What? Kat blinked at the harsh tone in his voice, but she pressed on. I have a favor to ask. He dropped his chin to his chest. He must love her. Love her like the fool he was. Even after the heartache she'd caused, Sam couldn't turn her away. Yes. I just bought 40 acres that would be perfect for a peach orchard, but I don't know the first thing about being an orchardist. Will you teach me? Sam stared hard at her. You bought land? In Snow Valley? Kat nodded. 40 acres. She nodded again. She couldn't have. Is this land, by chance, near my cabin? Kat grinned. Yep. Sam narrowed his eyes. Why? She stepped closer. Because this is my home. Snow Valley? He asked. No. She put her arms around his neck. Sam found his hands sliding around her back. He couldn't help himself. Holding Kat was what he was meant to do in this life. This is my home. And I'm here to stay. Sam's heart told him to tread carefully. Promise. On one condition. Kat's eyes sparkled. What's that? We never, ever have chickens, she said with a serious face. Laughing, Sam picked her up, the loan papers crinkling between them. This was how it should be. He and Kat would go in as partners in every way. Deal? They locked gazes, and Sam saw all his hopes and dreams reflected in her eyes. I love you, Kat O'Shea. I love you, Sam Miller. Sam's instincts frizzed, bleeped, and hummed, and he said something that was totally stupid. Will you marry me, Kat? Kat threw her gloves into the snow and put her bare hands on both sides of his face. Took you long enough to ask. Ha! Sam sealed the promise with a kiss, much to the delight of Snow Valley Main Street traffic. Car horns honked. People rolled down their windows and cheered. And Sam swung Kat around and dipped her low. Oh, he knew life wouldn't be all peaches and honey, but with Kat, it would always be sweet. Would you like more Snow Valley romances? Let me know in the comments. And stay tuned for my next full-length audiobook.
Thanks for listening. If you want more audiobooks, subscribe to my channel. Or, for an ad-free listening experience, check out my Patreon. To buy this book, or any of my others, check out my author page on Amazon. If you like the story, or have another series or book of mine that you'd like to see on YouTube, leave a comment below. I'm thankful for all my readers, listeners, and followers. You are the best and I appreciate your support. Much loves, Lucy McConnell.